This episode is about minutes 26 through 30 of The Empire Strikes Back with Dominic Sewell. Hello there, and welcome to Star Wars Music Minute, where we celebrate the music and sound of Star Wars 5 cinematic minutes at a time. I'm Chrysanthi Tan, or you can call me Xanthi, and today we are fully in the Battle of Hoth. It's very exciting times today, and this is minutes 26 through 30 of The Empire Strikes Back. This is going to be probably an especially exciting episode, particularly for those watching on YouTube, because today's guest, composer and orchestrator Dominic Sewell, or Dom as we can call him, has prepared an annotated score for these minutes. He's going to walk us through his analysis, and we'll have lots of visuals on screen. And if you have no idea how to make your way around a score, have no fear, because we'll catch you up to speed, and we'll have also plenty of audio examples as usual. I really wanted to do justice to the Battle of Hoth, and that's exactly why I invited you, Dom, to come on the show for these minutes. So thank you so much.
It's a real pleasure, and really excited to be here, Xanthi, as well. It's I've been following your work for some time, so it's I feel rather privileged to be here. So I hope that all the viewers are going to be interested in what we talk about today. So yeah, it should be fun.
Well, I am very interested. I think on behalf of all the viewers, especially people who have already responded on Twitter with their excitement for the Battle of Hoth, it's just, there are so many interesting things to talk about with it. Just so many things that we're going to get into. And your work is just so impressive. So no better person.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You can come again.
So I know you've already done a ton of super detailed Star Wars music analysis, and everyone check out the YouTube channel is called Dominic Sewell Music. So before we dig into the actual nitty gritty of the score, I just want to ask you, kind of a icebreaker question, I guess. Like, what stands out to you about the Battle of Hoth?
It's quite unlike any other cue, I think, in some ways. I mean, it's very... I'm trying to think of the right word, visceral, I guess. There's a sort of, I don't mean sort of anger, but there's a sort of real percussiveness to it. I mean, there is percussion in it, but it's, it requires huge forces. And actually, when I was doing the research for it, which, my channel is going to start with The Empire Strikes Back, having done Phantom Menace. So I'm sort of like suddenly jumping into probably the most difficult cue in the whole film in some ways. So thanks for putting me to work. I'm very grateful. It's hugely percussive. So, the original orchestration was crazy. 5 flutes with 2 piccolos, obviously doubling, but then 5 oboes. I mean, who uses 5 oboes apart from Holst, maybe, in the planets? Not many people, I don't think. And 2 pianos. And then a host of percussion, and it's that which I think he wanted to get a sort of really, not nasty sound, but sort of brutal sound.
Yes.
And yeah, that's definitely the thing that sort of personifies that cue. It's brutal.
Yeah.
I think actually it's marked.
You said 5 piccolos too, which is just ridiculous.
5 flutes with 2 piccolos. Yeah, 2 doubling piccolos.
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
I see.
But it's still crazy, isn't it?
Yeah. Just the 2 pianos and, multiple harps is just, I can't think of anything I've played that is like that.
No. I mean, weirdly, I was sort of looking at some of Bartok's music, because I think a lot of John Williams, owes a bit of a debt to Bartok. Mm-hmm. And I guess when he was himself a student with Tedesco, or Tedeschi, Castelnuovo Tedeschi, I think it was his name. He didn't study for that long, but he studied classical composition with him. And they must have talked about Bartok, because, I mean, it would have been very contemporaneous at the time. And Bartok used, he wrote a sonata for 2 pianos and percussion, so there's a bit of a connection there. Also, the music for strings, percussion, and celeste. Obviously, it's very different, but I think somebody remarked on a Twitter thing about it sounding a little bit like Planet of the Apes.
Yeah.
which has this sort of very arrhythmic, syncopated lines with, a sort of angular melodic construction. And there's definitely a bit in the Snow Battle where that happens. It's about as atonal as John Williams gets. And yeah, it's extraordinary. It's an amazing cue. Thank you for asking me to delve into it, because it's fascinating. It's really good.
The Bartók reference, it is a really good one. I mean, I'm thinking even like Bartók's, I think like especially the first piano. Am I thinking of the first piano concerto or the second? I'm not sure. But the something, the angularity of it in some ways. But we'll definitely get more into specifics when we start looking at your analysis and listening to things.
Totally. And I think always, where I come from, Xanthi, is that I tend to sort of try and give whatever I do analysis-wise a slant to the composer, to other composers, to student composers, people learning, or even experienced composers who want to just sort of, swat up on something. Because I think it's there, when you discuss the choices that composer could have made, I think you get into their brain a little bit more. It was kind of, there was a book out, years ago now, by a Cambridge scholar called Nicholas Cook, I think it was called Composition Through Analysis, or Analysis Through Composition. I can't remember which way round it was. But it was really interesting. He looked at Mozart's teaching books. So, people who studied with Mozart, and looking at what Mozart corrected as a teacher, saying, no, that's rubbish, or those notes don't work. And they were doing, gradus ad parnassum, ad parnassum, sort of, Renaissance music. And what was really interesting is the choices that the teacher, Mozart themselves, made. I just think that's really fascinating. And of course, it'd be wonderful to sort of perch on John Williams's shoulder, or, behind the bookcase, looking over his shoulder, to kind of work out why he does things and what he's doing. And I think trying to do a reduction and looking at the score is our way of perching on his shoulder, I think.
That's a really good way to think about it. Yeah. Okay. So the slant toward the composer means sort of keeping an ear, or just like keeping your feelers out for potential lineage or just influences from what came before. And I think that's really important when tracing sort of the development of music. Definitely. Our teachers give us so much and shape many things that aren't even like properly articulated necessarily. Like we were talking about this on Twitter, just sort of how like so many things are kind of passed from teacher to student.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I completely agree. Without going into too much detail, because our time is short and we need to get on. But, one of the things that my own teacher said, which I didn't sort of say on Twitter, because there's never enough room for those sorts of things to write. But he said, do you know who I think the greatest 20th century composer is? He said to me one day in a tutorial. And I went, no, Stravinsky or Bartók, sort of mumbling away. And he went, no, John Williams. Really?
Oh.
John Williams, the greatest 20th century composer? Yes, without a shadow of a doubt. And he would come out with these sorts of, quite contentious, possibly, phrases. But it would be an interesting argument to have with somebody who sort of said, no, he's not. He manages to, I think he just manages to solidify other compositional thought by, let's say, Stravinsky, and that's a good example, especially with this cue that we're about to look at, and Bartók, who we've already mentioned, and others, Vaughan Williams, I know, was a huge sort of influence on him, and we're talking about the theme on Thomas Tallis and things a while ago, weren't we? We're all getting very geeky about it, which is wonderful. So yes, I think it's important to study this music in the same way that you would study, any other composer, classical composer, And I think that's kind of changed, hasn't it? Especially over the last 10 or 12 years. And online too, bringing
Absolutely.
this music to a wider audience, I think is really important.
Absolutely.
So anyway, I'm gonna be quiet and let you get on.
Well, thank you for that little introduction to what may frame things to come later. So, in the spirit of bringing along as many listeners as we can on the journey that will be this episode, I'm going to run today's quick educational segment. That sounds so boring. I'm going to run today's little quick video before we jump into analysis, since it's a little primer on the anatomy and function of a score. So we will just run that. The word score has a couple different meanings in music. A score can refer to the musical soundtrack of a film, but a score also refers to the written or graphical document that shows all the parts in a piece of music and how they fit together. That's the kind of score I'll be talking about today. This is a pretty standard-looking orchestral score. Specifically, it is Dominic Sewell's transcription for the cue 3M2 in The Empire Strikes Back. A few things you may notice right off the bat. It's very dense, and the writing is impossibly small. On the left, there are a bunch of instruments labeled from top to bottom, and there are numbers that are increasing from left to right. In this case, 77, 78, 79, 80, etc. The reason this looks so dense is because a score contains all of the information for all of the instruments. Everything in the same vertical plane happens at the same time. If we wanted to follow along with, say, the bassoon 1 part, we would find where it says bassoon 1 on the score and read all the notes horizontally left from right, and the bassoon 1 part will always stay in its own horizontal lane or staff, so when we reach the end of the page, we will stay in the same lane and go to the next page. Now let's pause and look at the bassoon 1 part in isolation. A part is what an individual player's sheet music is called, and it only contains the information that the player of said part needs to play. You read a part from left to right, and when you reach the end of the line, you go down to the next line. This is the type of sheet music that most people are familiar with. Notice how the left side of the staff is open. When we go back to the full score, we see that the left side of the staff is not open. In fact, there is a long vertical line connecting all of the staves together from top to bottom, and that's how you can tell that all of those parts are to be played simultaneously. Multiple staves connected by a vertical line create what's called a system. We also see some thick vertical brackets, and those indicate groupings of instruments. In this case, the woodwinds are all connected by a bracket, the brass are connected by a bracket, we have percussion connected by a bracket, and the string section is connected by a bracket. The harp and piano each have their customary braces connecting their treble and bass clef staves, or, the right and left hands, which is already common to see on piano and harp music. The numbers you see at the top are the bar numbers, or measure numbers, same thing. Sometimes bar numbers are only listed at the beginning of each system, but the point is that sheet music of all kinds, especially scores, tend to have a combination of marker points, be it bar numbers, rehearsal letters, and just other ways of letting people know where they are. It's essential for players, conductors, people in the engineering booth, editors, etc., to know where they are in the music. In an orchestral session, you'll frequently hear things like, once more at letter A, or hey strings, change that to a subito piano 5 bars before B, or maestro, at 89, is that a C sharp or a C natural? So scores are musical documents that are jam-packed with information about how all the moving parts of a piece work together, but they're not just useful for performers and conductors. Scores are also useful for analyzers, analysts, especially people who are doing harmonic analysis. If you were to draw a vertical line at any part of the score, you'd get a cross-section of what every instrument is doing at the same time. This combination of multiple notes sounding simultaneously, or in quick succession, is essentially what harmony is. This is a big oversimplification, of course, but basically, melody is a thing that unfolds horizontally, while harmony takes place vertically. Speaking of music analysis, there is a specific type of score that can be even more useful for analytical purposes, and it's called a reduction. A reduction is a simplified version of a score that condenses more notes into less space, often taking multiple instrument lines and converting them into block chords to save space, as you see here. You still read it in the same way that you read a score, but it's just that there are fewer lines to contend with. This is Dom's orchestral reduction for one of the cues we're talking about today, 3M2 Leia's instructions from the Empire Strikes Back film. As you can see, it's much easier to read and annotate this than the full score we looked at before. And on that note, Dom has some amazing analysis prepared for us today. So without further ado, let's get into it with him. No pressure.
Not at all. And thank you for saving me when I realised I put episode 4 instead of 5 on it. Oh dear. Oh well. What a brilliant introduction, Xanthi. Thank you very much indeed for that. I think it's just very useful to sort of set that sort of intro up. So I think the first one for this 5-minute segment was the last little bit where we hear the Imperial March theme, kind of the back end of it really, and then it goes immediately pretty much into the Rebel fanfare. So
yeah,
I'm going to try and use this as my main sort of source for the viewer.
Okay.
So I'll sort of go up and down and backwards and forwards to talk about it.
Okay.
But
shall I start playing a little bit of the clip?
Yes, I think that'd be great. Yeah, let's do that, and we'll try and
warm us.
do it so I follow along. But there's going to be a little bit of a delay, isn't there? But
for sure.
I'll try and do what I can.
Yeah, just so people like know where we are in the story and everything.
Absolutely.
This is okay. Well, first of all, if you have the special edition soundtrack, if you have that very long track called "The Battle of Hoth," Ion Cannon / Imperial Walkers / etc., this corresponds to about 310 into that track. So that's a little guide point for people. And we are basically we're getting ready to kind of start things. So you'll hear in just a second. It's going to be an abrupt start.
Good. Our first catch of the day.
Stand by, ion control. Fire.
The first transport is away. The first transport is away.
There's already so many things happening. So much. Okay. We'll stop there for now. So much music.
It is a bit overwhelming. I mean, even when, scoring it, analysing it, it's a bit overwhelming, this cue. There's so much, there's such denseness to it, even in the reduction. And I mean, I've seen other reductions of this where it's even more simplified. I tend to sort of try and make sure that whoever's viewing it knows exactly who's playing what at any given time.
Right, because sometimes it can just look like piano, like amorphous sort of block chords, basically, unattributed.
Exactly. Yes. This tends to be sort of flutes, oboes, but in fact, this is just flutes and trumpets. So all of that sort of rebel theme that you get very, very near the beginning of it is just that. It's just block chordal harmonization, which I know we all went, yay, because it is great.
I mean, it's great, and it's also handy to have it in block form, so you don't have to transpose
absolutely
individual instrument lines too much.
Yeah. And also it means that you can sort of kind of see where things are doubled. So even something as simple as, when the trumpets are, in the middle of the stave, so it's a sort of, above middle C, which is there. They've got their G major chord there. But the flutes are an octave higher, so 8 notes higher, doubling every note. And it just gives it a little bit of, more depth to it. And it's just one of those orchestrator traits, which I know you've talked about with others before. It just gives it a little bit more of a slightly sweetening quality to the trumpet. But also we've got the same thing happening in the trombones as well. So there's actually 3 layers of block chords going on, because we've got the G below middle C, the G above middle C, and if I can just press my octave button, there we go, the G major chord above that as well. So there's a lot of denseness to it. And he does tend to do this, John Williams. He separates out material. So thematically, all the brass, apart from the low brass, are playing the Rebel fanfare. Everybody else is, I would call that sort of, contrapuntal fudge. That's not a word. I've just made it up. I don't think that exists. But it does now. It's just basically something else.
I wonder, would you consider... Okay, first, I'm going to play this so that we... okay. I should probably make it louder so that people can actually hear it. Okay. So the Rebel...
Stand by, I am control.
Yeah, so that part is what we were talking about with the block chords.
Yeah.
Yes. And then underneath that, which is like all those 16th notes, like, whatever. Contrapuntal sludge. I think, well, obviously that's similar to like the end credits, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And it's definitely supposed to be, it's part of the end credit. How's it go?
Yes. Yeah.
Like that. And basically each starting pitch is usually cleverly done per chord. So the E coincides with the E chord, the G coincides with the G, and then when it goes up to B flat. And that's interesting, isn't it? Because in this chord here, which I don't know why I've written G. Okay, no, that is G minor 7 actually, because of the bass. But it's interesting. He's used a sort of, a note that's common to the old chord and the new chord. Basically a pivot note. It's not modulating, but it's just a way of, when you're writing more notes per chord, you've got to think of what are the right notes to have. They've got to work. And Williams is extremely good at making sure that the notes work, but also not making them particularly predictable. Because most people would have written an A there. There we go. It's now an A. Because that's a passing note between the G and the B flat. It makes sense to have a scale movement. But actually he doesn't do that because he feels as though... maybe he didn't write that because it kind of mixes a bit too much with the B flat. I don't know. Could be something else.
So you're saying, like, if you were thinking idiomatically for the violin or the strings, that an A would seem more obvious.
Yeah.
But this is sort of a decision for the greater...
Yes.
I don't know. Yeah. The greater...
Yes. Sometimes ease of playing, and let's face it, John Williams is not the easiest of composers to play. If anybody's ever played the beginning of Harry Potter, they'll know.
Right.
Especially with the first violins. it's so hard.
This is what I hear. Yeah.
So we've got the Rebel fanfare theme, and it's all block chordal chords. So G and then E, G, then B flat. G and E. But what's interesting is that there's a pedal note. A pedal just means it's just the same note which is prolonged through different chords. And you get a really nice, what I think I saw on a recent Thomas Newman video, he likes to call a rub. So a note that's dissonant or not part of the other chord. So here we got a G natural and a G sharp, which is actually the most dissonant note that you can have, a minor ninth. But you kind of don't really recognize it because there's a lot of other stuff going on. But it's definitely there. Sorry, playing the wrong note. So yeah.
Yeah, the rub is between... Sorry.
Yeah.
Minor
that's
seventh.
right. Yeah, the G and... Yeah.
Major seventh. What am I talking?
It actually, you could call it an augmented octave if we were getting really pedantic.
Okay.
G and G sharp. But yeah, which is why,
G to G sharp.
So, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
So he does put these really interesting little bits of dissonance in, which kind of almost pass you by because they're very short. They don't last very long. But then he sort of controls it well because it doesn't last for long. It's just a semiquaver, and then suddenly G is part, it could be part of that, that chord, G minor 7 chord. And he likes all of these, that sort of idea. And it's just a way of creating tension somewhere. Fire iron cannon. Okay, this is the rebels, they're firing it, but there's still something not quite right. Well, that's because they have a reason to fire it.
Right.
So there's dissonance there. Sometimes we call it wrong note bass, where you have a chord and you just put kind of the wrong note. So if you had an E major chord, I could put a B flat in there.
Right, because B flat's not
That could be a
normally
John
major.
Williams. Yeah, that could be a John Williams chord,
Yeah, I can see that.
like that. But yeah, it's just as is. So we've got material separated out. Wind and brass are playing all the block chordal things, the thematic material. The strings are playing the sort of filigree, let's call it. A bit more delicate runs. I think it's a nicer word, isn't it?
You know what, Frank,
was it?
I think that's well, would you consider this an example of what Frank Lehman puts in his catalog as the heroic descending tetrachords?
Probably, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, because he does name
definitely.
that from the other example.
Yes.
That's heroic descending tetrachords, which some people get a kick out of, like, that it has to have a name like that.
Yeah, I just like the word tetrachord. It's
Me too.
brilliant.
So this is, even though it's not the same notes, it falls in the same vein because tetrachord, it's a 4-note, grouping.
Yeah.
And that's what we have here.
Absolutely. That's what you have here. So then over the page, I'm going to try and just do that so you can see a little bit more of what's going on.
Okay.
So we've suddenly got, I think he says it's our first catch of the day with a sort of, I've always wondered what accent where's he from?
That's a good question.
It's just, and our first catch of the day. There's something slightly sort of European about it, I think, but I don't know what. It's a sort of unspecified trait to his voice. Catching fish, which is, a giant sort of freighter, sort of taking refugees from the rebel base. Really interesting. Anyway, and this is where it gets even more complicated because actually Frank has done an amazing job listing all of the thematic material in the Hoth battle. So what I've done in my versions is I've cross-referenced it with his work because I think it's kind of fair to build upon what he's done rather than just sort of claim something to be different. What's the point, So here we've got another theme, which I think he just calls the G theme. Exciting brass figure for the iron cannon volley. And I've put it sort of, I haven't actually proofread this, I'm afraid. So it's full of little spelling mistakes and things like that. But
yeah.
I'm kind
Can
of,
we, let's pause for a second so that we can show people Frank Lehman's catalog.
Oh, yes.
Basically, I know it's basically a drinking game at this point every time I mention Frank Lehman's name. So you're going to be very drunk by the end of this episode. So once again, he has a really amazing section of his catalog, which, is mainly focused on the leitmotifs and also the incidental motifs like the heroic descending tetrachords. But he has this whole section dedicated to set piece themes. And the Battle of Hoth is, what he considers a set piece theme. It's, you can read more about it here, but basically it's kind of an isolated, like epic, cue set of cues. It's, and just like the set piece, visually it's a set piece and, musically it's a set piece theme. So, he has shown this in multiple ways. So if you don't read music, you can even understand this. He has a waveform on this page for the Battle of Hoth because he has focused on breaking down the Battle of Hoth. So he has a waveform separated into sections for the 5 different cues. And so I have taken the liberty of color coding them up here. The ones we're talking about today are crossing over 1B, 2, and 3. So look how intense this is. Okay. He has listed out from A to Z, so like 26 little individual statements, basically, like little individual themes. And if you go back to this waveform, really small, like he says, he shows you the timestamp. He shows you, or the timestamp according to the recording, I should say, not the film. And yeah, shows you which letters are where, and even which like proper leitmotifs, because there are points where rebel fanfare and stuff like that, droids. So yeah, this is quite amazing. So in Dom's reduction, he has referred to like R or whatever the letters that are happening. It's recommended. Recommended you pull this up, franklehman.com/Star Wars if you feel so inclined. So,
and it's always being updated, isn't it?
It's always being updated.
Doing an incredible job, especially with the recent Andor series as well, of course. So I presume that's to come at some stage, but not Williams related, obviously. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so we get to this theme here, which is...
You could turn your keyboard up a little bit, by the way.
Okay, let me try turning it up there. Is that better?
Yep.
It's really obscure. It's quite angular, isn't it, that melody? We were talking about it before.
Yeah.
It's quite sort of, I mean, he does have an amazing capacity for reusing rhythms and doing things with them. So, for example, it's the tripleness or the tupletness of it, or like that. So it's not even a complete tuplet. And there it is again. So anything with a number 3 on it, there we go. Mm-hmm. And then there's another one there. And that leads to all of these sort of fourths, perfect fourths and things. And in amongst that, he's got this amazing counterpoint. So I'm going to try and just play both those lines together.
That is
and it speeds up as well.
Cool.
It is amazing, isn't it? And this is the beauty of doing reductions oneself. If you are able to, I guess, that you can separate things out and really get under the skin of what's going on. So this line here is a separate melody, which is actually not listed in Frank's thematic bit, I think, at that point, because it's just a rising scale of semitone, tone, semitone, tone.
Mm-hmm.
A particular
half step,
whole step,
half step, whole step.
Yeah. We call it the octatonic scale, or I think jazzers call it the double diminished scale or something like that, I think.
Oh, okay. We've talked about octatonic scales on the show, but in case people need a refresher, do you mind explaining?
Yeah. It's like this. So if I just do one from middle C, I'll take it down an octave so that it's not going into ridiculous ledger line territories. This is bass clef, so I'm actually going to put it in the treble clef because I think that's going to be a bit easier. There we go. I should have looked at where I was doing it. So yeah, it has a particular weird sort of, let's say, exotic quality to it. So it starts off with a semitone or a minor second, then tone, then another semitone, tone, etc. So it's just a self-perpetuating symmetrical scale, we call it.
Mm-hmm. And what does symmetrical scale mean?
It just means it's got the same distances between each note on a regular basis. So you can have another one which would be, I don't know, minor second, minor third, minor second, minor third. That's another type of scale. And in fact, I think, was it Messiaen who called them modes of limited transposition? Which is a rather sort of long-winded term, but basically it was just his way of listing symmetrical scales. And I think composers have often been quite sort of fascinated by symmetry, mirror images of things or doing things backwards or whatever. And this is a good example of it. But as with a lot of Williams, he doesn't always stick to one scale. So he might use elements of it And weirdly, I mean, it might not be obvious, but going back to the Rebel Fanfare theme, all of those chords, the G chord, which is in red here, is in there. The E major chord, let's put a sharp there, is also in there. And also the B flat chord. And then, sorry, I'm going to go lower. They're all part of the octatonic scale as well. That's extraordinary, because that doesn't sound anything like that.
Right.
At all. But it's
Right.
the same scale. It's the same scale form. And that's what I find really remarkable about these sorts of symmetrical scales, is that there's so many possibilities. When we get onto 3M3, we'll discover that that scale is also used to generate all of the piano chords as well.
That'll be fun to talk about. So octatonic scales, I feel like maybe I guess one way that they're fascinating is they're quite agile.
Yeah.
They're quite, I joked about this on a past episode where I was like, I bet you could Google octatonic composer secrets or something. And I'm pretty sure I Googled that and I'm pretty sure I found stuff. Just like, composing tips or tips to use octatonic scales, because you can see there are so many like pivot points. There are so many ways you can,
Yeah. There are lots of ways of
navigate
having a
into
look at it,
different
aren't
territory.
there?
Yeah. And John Williams uses them a ton.
He uses all of them. So you've got sort of major chords, you've got minor chords, and you've also got diminished chords. Surprisingly, no augmented chords. That's the unique quality of this scale, is that there are no generative augmented chords, I don't think.
Okay.
So it tends to be used in a lot of action cue music. And for some of the listeners, you might have heard of Mark Richards and his course on action music cues, which he's done about a year or two ago, I think just for lockdown. I'll
put a link.
Yeah, we'll put a link up. And he's fantastic, actually. I think based in Canada.
So it's for composers, in learning how to, write better action music.
Yes, basically.
Okay,
And
cool.
he also uses piano basically as a sort of way of just sort of getting into how do we use the octatonic scale? What's it made out of? What can we make from it? And there's an
awesome.
extraordinary chord that you can make from it, which I'm going to save until
Yes. Okay.
3M3.
Sounds good.
So we will get onto it. So I'll leave that up there for the time being. We can come back to that. But it is amazing that, two completely different bits of material are drawn from the same scale, whereas one's completely major and sort of, all of that. And then this is all, it's sort of chromatic and weird and sort of, it's not angular,
Yeah.
but it's just sort of, it's leapy. I guess we'd say. And in amongst all of that, we've got this sort of bass line which sort of chugs along. It's supporting the chords, broadly speaking. We've kind of got C minor, kind of still C minor, then it goes to D, then it becomes E, then it becomes F. It's going to get to F. And it's often a way that composers use to get from one bit of material to another, that you need to get somewhere that makes logical sense. You can't just sort of suddenly start something without preparing the listener for it, or else it sounds very disjointed. And one of the ways which Williams does this is by creating sequences or scale forms, and this is exactly what he's doing. This is a type of sequence, so it starts on, and then it just gets transposed up a perfect fourth to F. And then that happens to be the leading note to that note, the B flat, which is his target note. So you could almost do it backwards. There's your target note. Work backwards. Oh, let's just do an octatonic scale to a B flat. There we go. I mean, you might sort of make it a little bit less obvious, but that's exactly what he does.
Well, I feel
so
like
he
it's not
transposes those things.
Exactly. I feel like, it's very common for composers, I mean, especially in film and just regardless, to sort of have maybe a section where you want to be in a certain key, or you want to hit a certain note or something at a certain point. But and I know, I mean, maybe you don't ever deal with this, but you have a starting point. You know a place that you're targeting, and then you're like, how do I get there without making it sound like, oh, I'm just trying to just get there?
Yeah. I mean, definitely when I used to teach young composers, it was always, obviously is an obvious way of getting somewhere is just a scale. But what sort of scale? How can you change that scale around to make it a bit more interesting for the listener and keep them a little bit more interested? And so that's where things like the octatonic scale, or, even just a harmonic minor scale, or a melodic minor scale, but do it ascending, not descending. Those sorts of things, mixing them up a bit is definitely part and parcel of the craft of the composer. And Williams is able to go seamlessly from, let's say all of this bit sort of kind of octatonic, but then suddenly at this bar here, which is bar 89 on my sort of bit here in the 2/2 bar. So changing the meter. So we've got 2 half notes in a bar. He's got this rather expectant chord. Just played on its own, it sounds as though it could be Dallas at any point. But it's a suspended chord, so we kind of want that to go there, but it doesn't. It just remains. And it keeps us kind of, something's about to happen. And he's very good at using those suspended chords here to make sure that, okay, it's kind of getting to the next action point, the next thematic material. One thing I noticed, Xanthi, I don't know whether you agree with this at all, but what I found really interesting is that we've got this little bit of... It's just an ascending perfect fourth figure. But there's a bit later in the film, and spoiler alert, okay, Luke discovers that Darth Vader is his father. No! No! He's brilliant. He's such a good actor, Mark Hamill. He really is, actually.
Underrated.
And there's a brilliant bit where I think he gets blown out, or he deliberately falls from the bridge later in the film. And you've got this small amount of little trumpet call, and there's all this sort of flowery music that sort of goes down there. I wish I could find... I put a reference in, 1 hour, 52 minutes on the Disney Channel. Okay, what is that in the film?
1 hour and 52. What is that in just minutes? That would be... Well, 2 hours would be 120 minutes. So...
Yeah. So, 112 or something like that, I think it is.
Okay.
Something like that.
Well, I can do that. It's after this.
It's just after this, yeah.
Okay.
That's impossible! Search your feelings, you know it's the
Major
truth.
spoiler.
Major spoiler.
No!
Coming up.
Luke, you can destroy the Emperor. He has foreseen this. It is your destiny. Join me, and together we can rule the galaxy as father and son.
He's not gonna like that.
Coming up.
Come with me. It is the only way.
Oh, there it is.
Yes.
Oh.
Weird, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then it's got this amazing sort of, afterwards. And what's really interesting is that immediately after that little nugget there, we've got Luke's main theme. And I don't know whether that was sort of intentional or anything. It might have just simply been an unconscious decision by Williams at that point. This is where we would like to be the shoulder, sitting on his shoulder and then tapping that shoulder and going, oh, you know that perfect fourth. Are you going to use that later in the film?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I might do, Dom, but can you just leave me to compose? Yeah, sure. Sorry, Mr. Williams. Or it could simply just be the fact that he's used that chord, and that's part of it. That's part of it. That's part of the chord. Oh, it's just a horizontal version of something that's vertical.
Do you mind if we listen to that in the context of the film so that people?
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's get back into.
Feeling all right, sir?
Okay, it's after
Just
this.
like new, Dak. How about you?
Wait,
Right now,
it's
I
after.
feel like I
Is
can
it?
take on the whole empire myself.
It's before.
It's before this. Yeah, yeah.
It's before. It's near the beginning. Yeah.
Oh, wow, it passes by so quickly.
Very, very quickly. So
yeah.
I sometimes treat these with a bit of caution because it's,
Yeah.
it's a little bit sort of tenuous.
Yeah.
But I still think it's valid in the terms of the fact that, okay, it's still supporting the chord and it kind of works. And also, he's got this sort of descending fourth theme with something else later on. I can't remember where it is now, but we'll get to it, and I've marked it in. So it does happen later. So, it's not implausible, I think. So then we move on to the next bit, and this is E, the military preparation theme.
This part just trips me out. Like,
Yeah,
it's,
I know what you mean.
and I don't think that. Let me play it. That the flute part really sticks out to me.
Yes.
Right there.
The first transport is away.
It's sort of the contrast between like the strings and the
yeah.
flutes.
Yeah,
And or Glock is, I guess, your Glock is involved as well.
And yes, and because that chord kind of wants to go to B flat, really. That's what the expectation that's set up. So he's on this F sus chord, and it goes. What? Where did that come from? But notice that the theme, the sort of scene changes slightly, doesn't it? Because there's a cut at that point in the film,
Right, and you can hear the cut.
and it could
so,
and so sometimes he uses that deliberately as a delineation point, in
this?
order to go. Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
As a way of just sort of going, okay, this is new material. Oh, it's kind of a cut scene somewhere else on the picture. It's just a way of him scoring it to picture. Because, of course, we can talk about the music, but, of course, it's film music. And this is a good example of his synchronization capabilities. He's very good at going, come on, audience, look at this. This is something different. And here it is. And it is different.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, that's quite angular, isn't it? I'll just play it on here. It's kind of nasty.
It's so
sort of like, ooh.
like it always perks my ears up. I don't think this is also. I also don't think this is listed in. Is it listed in Frank's?
No,
Yeah. Okay.
I don't think so. I mean, but it's kind of. I think he probably, it's just another example of this sort of angularity. So what's that? A fifth, and then another fifth, but then it doesn't do that. Now, this is a good point, Xanthi. So, did your composition teacher always say 1 is okay, 2 is memorable, 3 is too much? Did they
No.
always give you that advice? Okay. My teacher often said that, and I've noticed it in Williams a lot.
We'll do it twice.
He does the sequence twice, and then the last one is what you might call a breakout. So you don't do the same thing. So with this,
I
the
see.
last bit is a sort of different sequence, because otherwise he could have just gone
Oh, okay. I see.
like that.
Mm-hmm.
But he doesn't.
That's funny. It's funny that you pick up on that because now I've had like just imagining Williams thinking of his teacher.
Well, this is what this. So this comes back. Actually, I'll answer the question because it's partly answering a question you're about to ask in about an hour's time.
Okay.
Or 45 minutes, depending on how long we do. This could be an extended version, I think, with this cue. So yeah, it goes into a D Phrygian mode. So it basically does that, and it's quite an exotic mode. One thing that struck me is that there's nothing really doing any rhythmic elements apart from, this is weird, bass clarinet and bassoons playing repeated notes, chugging along. Look at that. So all of that is just going.
Yeah.
There we go. Yeah. But there's nothing else doing it because there's no other sort of rhythmic. I mean, I guess you've got one level of counterpoint here with this sort of subsidiary rhythm, let's say, rhythmic theme. But then we've just got harmonic cement, or harmonic bricks, rather. So without it, it sounds a bit bare. So on the piano, just here. And we'll get onto that bit.
This section, this transitional section to the next part. I mean, I guess transitional is in the eye of the beholder, but that's okay. So this definitely feels transitioning. And then what comes after, just this string line feels so a completely different thing, almost. Like,
yes.
Whatever the notes are, but like it's just this like legato. And it kind of flows into the next thing. It sort of feels like it's more part of the next section.
Yes, and it's a way of sort of, and this is another sort of compositional teaching point, really, is that you bring elements of wherever you're going to next. So let's call that B. In wherever you've come from, let's call that A. So you've got a bit of an A-B thing. It's not necessarily the same material, but it has the essence of that material. It has the DNA of it.
It eases the transition. Yeah,
absolutely. And he often uses these sort of rather special chords. Here, a half diminished G chord, which is rather exotic, isn't it?
What do you mean?
It's spicy. It's got a bit of lemon juice, I think my
lemon
old teacher
juice
would say. Yeah. Bit of piquancy. There's something in it that sort of makes you go, oh, okay.
Yeah.
It's a very sort of unpopular chord these days because it's quite sort of, romantic. It's sort of one of those sort of rather, it's one of those sorts of Tristan and Isolde type thing.
Yeah. I see what you're saying. I mean, it's certainly one that is harder. It's more ambiguous. It's slightly more ambiguous.
Yes.
Which makes it easier, or which makes it harder to predict exactly where he's going to go with it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's sort of use a sort of airy, sort of coloristic chord rather than a sort of functional chord that goes that.
Right.
That would be banal.
Yeah,
so
functional in terms of like functional harmony, whereas chords serve a function in.
I mean, everything has a function. I just mean, let's call it dominant to tonic based harmony. In other words, you want to get to an end goal, which is a tonic, and it's kind of the dominant preparation for getting to the home.
Correct. So listeners, if this is the tonic, then a dominant preparation, which is like the very first thing you learn in like music theory class, I guess, is it's like shaving a haircut. Or whatever. I'm in the wrong key. But yeah, exactly. There you go. Thank you. You just expect that to be, that's what you expect. So dominant is the chord that comes before the tonic, which is the landing chord. Yeah. And so this is not the typical dominant tonic.
No, but it still has the function of it in the sense that it's still preparing for a new bit of material. So he often uses these in different ways that, a traditional, if you're just learning harmony at school or whatever, this sort of goes way beyond that. So it has the essence of the function, but it's not the actual notes. It's really weird to talk conceptually like that, but it's just something in place of something. A substitute chord, I suppose you could call it. It has the same function, but it sounds different. Let's say, putting it very simply. So we then move into this extraordinary next passage, which is identified as H in Get Your Drinks Ready, Frank Lehman's thematic catalogue, which is this lovely Walton-esque. Sorry, my fingers are too big for my keyboard, so I missed out the note. But yeah, he calls it broad, optimistic, in a Walton-esque vein, with a single iteration at the end of the cue, tight, slightly dissonant harmonization. it's a D major seventh chord. So you've got this sort of that sort of idea, but he uses it in a different inversion. And actually, he would probably argue that it is kind of a D chord, but he often loves that sort of rub in the horns between the second voice and the first voice. It's what you're told not to do as a jazz arranger. And he does it all the time in horns. Yeah.
Yeah, the way that it's stacked in particular.
Yeah.
Yeah. So can you, I know that you're like you're the Walton person. You're a
Well,
Walton.
kind of. I mean, the trouble is that sometimes you do a project and then people keep asking you about, so what do you think of Walton? And sometimes it's a bit misleading. So, but you're right. I did basically orally transcribe Walton's Henry V score.
Lord.
Which took me months. I mean, there are other bits of music in existence, but it was very complicated to get hold of some of them because Walton's wife used to sell them to pay for her gardens, evidently. I don't think that's libelous because she's not alive. But yeah, so some of them are missing, basically. Evidently. Apparently.
Yeah, so Walton would be like, this is the section where, well, let me play it because the dialogue here I feel is very...
The first transport is away.
Feeling all right, sir?
Just like new, Dak. How about you?
Right now, I feel I can take on the whole empire myself.
I know what you mean.
It's so sweet.
Brilliant.
I also feel like you could just
Lovely.
replace their lines with like, how's it feel to graduate, sir? Just like new. I feel like I could take on the whole workforce myself. Like,
It is. It's really optimistic, isn't it? It's sort of, new teacher day. Oh, we got a new teacher. They're really enthusiastic. Not the jaded teacher who's been there 25 years.
right. And it's very, I mean, I guess Walton-esque, like William Walton, which we've mentioned a couple times on this show, mainly in the vein of like John Williams's English inspirations, sort of like Elgar and Walton, just sort of that, as Frank and Samantha Tripp would call like Pax Britannica. I forgot what it's called. I don't know. Edwardian, like sort of, that's sort of, reminds me of like the medal ceremony from A New Hope.
Yes. Yeah. It's sort of, heroic. I mean, Walton, wrote lots of royal music.
Yeah. Orb Scepter.
Orb Sept, absolutely. Crown Imperial and all this sort of thing. And, in school orchestras, we used to sort of play all of these things. Yeah. But he does have a very good command of something that sounds regal and hopeful.
Yes.
And this is a good example of it, where you've got these stacked notes. And I love Williams for that because, lots of people sort of perhaps, we don't use Lydian anymore and this sort of thing. But actually,
Williams does.
Williams does a lot. And I love that chord. You could look at it in two ways. It is definitely a D-bass chord, but sometimes he uses the chord as that chord with an added.
Yeah, I was immediately thinking of E.T. Yeah,
I know, because it's kind of that chord is definitely, that sort of that first inversion, let's call it, where you have the third note or the middle note of a triad in the bass. Mm-hmm. You see that hope feeling, and that's definitely something that I guess the English school goes all the way back to Purcell, Handel. That sounds like Handel to me.
Yeah.
It could chug along quite happily to keep doing that. And it sounds sort of rather hopeful and grand and things like that. So it's just his way of sort of, I guess, sort of what's the right word?
It's such a deft invocation of that other modality, I guess, in the midst of the rest of this cue. It's
Yes.
clearly it clearly is what it is, and I don't know. There's something very I don't know. There's like a clarity in that I find very
Definitely
special.
Yeah, and absolutely, and like with all good composers, he uses the space in the long notes to then incorporate rhythmic elements somewhere else. So that's why you have this sort of bass. I mean, it's very simple. It's just a repeated note with a tuplet. But notice that the tuplet's always within the long notes. So here, there's another long note, and he's got that going on. Kind of, it gets a bit more complicated there, but there's another long note, and then, of course, he's got that space here for when Dax sort of replies to him, waiting for the reply, add an extra beat onto the 2/2 time signature.
Leave space for the dialogue.
Otherwise it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And then he just reorchestrates it with some more woodwind at the top. And then suddenly uses this chord. So it ends on a sort of G6 chord, and then suddenly has a C sharp. So another preparation for like that. And the next cue, guess what notes it starts on? C sharp. So another really good transition point. And in terms of energy, he's increasing rhythmic momentum, crescendo, everything. He's very good at sort of going, because I think some of the time where you see, let's say, student composers or composers who are just starting, sometimes they might cut out texture before a big crescendo, and you think, why are you doing that? That's the opposite of what you want to do. You want to have more texture and more tension and more energy, and often Williams is a very good example of how he manipulates tension-making things and tension-releasing things, forward momentum and release momentum. And he's an absolute master of that, I think.
So here, where there's this crescendo and we have all of these voices holding a note, and then we have down here, we can see that, that's where the extra, rhythm is happening, I guess. Would you say that so this is building tension. Would you say that when he's releasing tension, he tends to do the opposite, like strip away rhythmic elements?
Definitely. Yes, I mean, you see it in things like Duel of the Fates, where, it's not always, it's sort of...
Yeah.
That, and just creating literally, I mean, we could go on, couldn't we? There we go. Keep building those notes. Absolutely. It's just a good way of getting, and because an ostinato is really hard to get out of. It's very easy to do. How do you stop it? You have to add space. This sort of, the only thing you can do is just not add those notes. It might do that. So you're literally slowing things down, fewer instruments, putting more rests in there, basically, is the way forward. Or
like augmenting the rhythm.
Yeah, exactly. So that is the end of that sort of specific cue, but it runs straight into the big stomping ATSTs.
Exciting times.
Oh my God, we're finally going to do it. Let me get the reduction out. So this...
Well, first we have like 30... Oh my God.
It was a lot of work.
That's so many pages just for the reduction. Oh my gosh.
I mean, as I said, it has been done before. So if you go onto Brad Frey's amazing website, I have to say, he's done an amazing job. But he doesn't always... Sometimes it's a bit hard to follow what's playing what. And I wanted to do a slightly larger version of this in order for us to really get to grips with, okay, you've only got 4 trumpets, but they're playing a 5-note chord. Which note are they leaving out?
So you're saying he reduces 5. A little bit further?
A little bit further, yeah.
Yeah, I gotcha.
And there's nothing wrong with that at all.
Oh, of course.
I've just done it a slightly different way. I'll let you lead into this.
Well, first there's no music for about 30 seconds, about 20 something seconds. And this is when we have it's quote unquote silence. Obviously not. There's sound design happening as well, but we have the shot of the binoculars, or I don't know if they're quadnoculars or something like that, but very classic Star Wars shot to have. And the trench officer says Echo Station 3T8, and then we transition. I'll actually play it back to the Rebel Base corridor. So let's hear that. We hear some wonderful worldized sound where we hear people talking on one end, and then we hear it coming out of the other end, through the speaker. And you can tell without even looking at the picture when the scene is changing that the location has completely changed. So let's just hear that a bit. So you can hear that's the binoculars.
Echo Station 3T8. We have spotted Imperial Walker.
Different location. And now we're back. We're back with a bang.
And we really are back in with the back. I mean, I think originally the cue had music in it, and it just got cut.
Yeah.
And actually, all of that music was simply this material. So this sort of C sharp, that sort of idea. So yeah, we're bang into it. Maybe we should hear a little bit of it first,
for sure,
to put in context, if that's all right.
Yeah. Okay, it's gonna start pretty suddenly, everyone.
Okay.
Echo Station 5-7. We're on our way. All right, boys, keep tight now.
Luke, I have no approach vector. I'm not set.
Steady, Dak. Attack pattern Delta.
Go now.
All right, coming in.
Kind of a groove here.
Bobby, you still with me?
It's hard to even know where to stop because it just keeps going. But let's bite off.
Just keeps going.
Yeah, let's start with that.
It's like taking a little bit too much steak, isn't it?
So many notes on so many notes.
I know.
And textures.
Too many notes. Oh, it's extraordinary. Yeah. So, I mean, I haven't actually done this for my own channel yet. So I've kind of, I have obviously looked at it a lot. And it took quite a while to work out what's going on. And this is probably a time to go back to the octatonic scale, because that tends to generate all the material. And it's really strange because, of course, when you're writing a theme or a tune or something, especially when you're starting out, you kind of pick a key and you pick the notes in that key. This is exactly the same. It's just the key happens to not be G major or C major. It happens to be octatonic. In other words, this sort of symmetrical scale, which we've looked at before in the previous cue, and it generates material. So whereas before it generated this and like that, it's now generating which is the same thing. It's an octatonic scale starting on C sharp at this point. And then it's also generating...
Let's play this octatonic scale. Let's see. It's C sharp, D, E. And so, by generative, you mean chords and everything are being built from those building blocks.
Yeah, they're all being built from it. So, for example, you could... So I've done little arrows from the C to the C here, and then the D, E, and then the F, and we can keep going. But also, let me just home in a bit for those eagle-eyed people. Yeah. So, what on earth's going on. So I'm going to try and break it down. So these chords are kind of extraordinary. So we've got G, E, D, B, and A flat or G sharp. Now, before getting into the intricacies of this, there's one really important thing, is that often with Williams, he loves major sevenths. I mean, loves them. So the outer notes often have the interval of a major seventh. Whoops, suddenly it disappeared from me. Let's bear that in mind. With whatever technicality we have, he will fill that major seventh space with other pitches. Those other pitches happen to be...
You mean in between, since a major seventh is so big? Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So he usually fills them in with other notes from a specific scale, but not always. And this is an example of where it's not always the case. So he does use this, what I call set 532. I'll explain that in a minute, because that does require a bit of explanation. Mm-hmm. But the most important bit is this span, and that you can kind of put any other notes in there. You know, anything, and it would kind of work. Just about. But it works better if it's perhaps joined with a specific type of tonality. So in this case, it's octatonic. So all of these notes are in fact drawn from that. So the G is here. Mm-hmm. The E is here. The D is there as well. The A flat stroke G sharp is there. And so is the B natural. All of those notes are from that scale. So it sounds... It's definitely from that scale. Mm-hmm. It just takes a lot of hard work to work out where it is actually from.
Yes. Very tedious.
It is a bit tedious, I have to say. And I, often on my own channel, I've done quite a lot of work on pitch class sets. Yes. And, I get endless questions about it. And I tend to sort of, actually, I got a patron request saying, I don't understand what it means. Please help me. So I actually thought, I'll just do you a video. It's so much easier. So I have actually got a little primer.
Oh, I'd love to put that in the show notes.
12 minutes. I'll try and find it at the end and then send you a link.
Awesome.
We'll put it up for everybody. So it might appear now in YouTube. So, and I've also done like a little primer sheet with it as well. So I've actually talked about what they actually are. So I'll wait for that to settle down on it. I'll just bring it here. I won't go through all of this particularly,
but I think a little tiny. I feel like pitch class set theory is like something that some people, I think a lot of people will just not want to engage with that at all. And then I think for some people, it would actually make a lot more sense than talking about notes and letters.
Yeah. I mean, essentially, it was invented by Alan Forte in a sort of a rather dry book, let's face it, called The Structure of Atonal Music, published in 1973, which coincidentally was the year I was born. So coming up to the big 50 next year. And he developed a list of all possible combinations of notes, which sounds a silly thing to do, but he did it anyway, because he wanted to go and listen to the music or look at the music of, let's say, Anton Webern or Alban Berg or any of those composers, Schoenberg as well, of course, to find out whether there were connections between pitch material, which didn't involve serial work. So kind of then you have to explain serialism, but basically that would be a series of notes or a series of intervals actually that are consistently used, transposed, and other procedures are done to them, invert them, retrograde them. But what happens when you don't have a set series of notes and you want to still find a connection? So for example, in this music, does that make any relationship with that? And the answer is yes. And the only way of really discovering that connection is through this kind of theory called pitch class set theory. So,
yeah, let me just interject and clarify that, like, Webern and this is especially useful, I guess, in school. It's sort of like you sort of learn it as part of atonal music theory. And because if you have a good ear, you can get through Mozart, Bach, like a lot of John Williams even, you can get through a fair amount of music by ear, kind of being able to, understand relationships really more simply, not even just by ear, but just with, standard functional harmony. And when you listen to stuff that sounds like, it's just like random notes all over the place, it can be really hard to figure out, is there any pattern to this? Is there any order? It's like sounds chaotic. And so if you further, I guess pitch class set theory is almost like a further abstraction. It's sort of like just assigning, numbers, it makes it easier in a way to see connections between things that you can't necessarily hear. Like some people I'm sure can hear, but like there gets to a certain amount of notes where I can't hear it myself.
Same.
So
and for me, it was a revelation because it meant, especially in a film like The Phantom Menace, which I started doing, there's some really, really gnarly harmonies in there. There's some very advanced modernist work, and it's very, very difficult to decipher. And it's not in E major or any. It's not an octatonic scale. It's something else. And often you can see where the harmony is from because those sets of 5 pitches might be part of a larger set of notes. And in this case, they are. So I should probably explain what the numbers mean and why we use numbers for things. So I'll attempt to do this. Let's think. I might just use the wiki page actually for this.
I have
if I can
ready,
find
I
it.
think.
Oh, you've got it. Brilliant. Okay.
We're working on it.
If not,
I have to share the right screen. Okay. Show. There we go. Okay. So I'll go to the Forte numbers.
Brilliant.
Well, I should start
Great
with this
stuff.
page actually, probably, right?
That's fine. Yeah.
And then I can
So
open a new
we can
tab.
just go straight to the. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, actually, we can just go straight to the list. It's
Yeah.
fine. Let's pick 419. So if you just scroll down.
I'm just trying to position the windows so I can see everything.
I know.
Yeah. Okay, so hopefully you can see like my mouse kind of making things big. So 419, we're looking at Forte numbers. So we're on this
Yes.
list.
So
we're
a Forte
down
number
here.
is just his arbitrary way of listing notes. So 0 will be there's no notes. 1 there'll be 1 note and it will be a semitone.
Yeah.
And so the way he sort of has his method is by trying to find the smallest interval on the left and then an increasing interval. So let's do 419. So here he's listed 4, which means there's a 4-note chord. 19 is just the set where it is in his arbitrary list, so that can be ignored. It's irrelevant, really. The first one just tells you how many notes there are. And then the numbers are to do with assigning a letter to each number. So C is 0, in other words, middle C. Then 1 is D flat. Then 2 is D. 3 would be E flat. 4 would be E natural, like that, etc. There we go. Brilliant. Look at that. Fantastic. So that you have all of those notes, which can then be sort of numerically manipulated, basically. And the interesting thing about them is not just the fact that there are, numbers of things. It's to do with the interval content. So the next column, which is this really weird, obscure thing in those sort of other brackets, are to do, it's actually a column, which is really weird. So the furthest left one tells you how many minor seconds there are in that set. I mean, there's definitely going to be 1 because it's 01, so it's a C to a D flat, so there's definitely going to be 1 of them. The next column is how many major seconds there are. The next column is how many minor thirds, then major thirds, then what have we got? Perfect fourths, and then augmented fourths.
Yeah, so
And the reason it stops
increasing.
there,
Yeah.
the reason it stops there is that those can all be inverted to create wider intervals. So a second can become a 9th or a 7th.
And if you bisect an
6th can
octave,
become
that's an augmented fourth. So
Yeah,
that's just half.
Yeah, it's the exact halfway point in a sort of tempered scale. So it's a way of discovering pitch content and seeing how it relates. And what makes it interesting is that you can get a pitch class set theory calculator. I don't know whether Xanthi's got one prepared. You have. Fantastic. So if you type in, so you've got something like 6Z19B. So can we change that to 419? Just if you type in 4-19 and then hit return, fantastic. It will give you the Forte number. So you've got 01, I think it says 48, does it on there?
Yeah, 0148.
Yeah. So you can go to where it says superset, and from the scroll down thing, so to the right of that, that's the subset. So superset. So if you choose from the subset, I think you need to actually click on the little triangle there. That's it. If you click on the triangle for the drop-down list,
I see it.
Eventually do it.
I see the drop-down.
Okay,
it might not be showing up on
so,
screen. But
yeah,
I see
weirdly,
it says
I can't see it.
trichords, tetrachords. Yeah, that's weird. It says trichords, tetrachords, pentachords. Yeah.
Cool. So let's try hexachords. Let's try 6-note chords. So then you see the supersets there, and if you scroll down, there should be a 6Z19 or 620, perhaps something like that. Hopefully, you might need to scroll up again, but it should be one of those.
There is a 6Z19.
Perfect, and that's coincidentally a set that Williams uses a lot. So it's a way of going, oh, what's the overriding scale form that this chord belongs to? Ooh, okay. So it's really important when we've got something like 532. So actually, let's type in 532
and
see whether
number.
That is in the Forte number. Yeah.
And again, 5 means there's 5 notes, and 32 is just Forte's.
Yeah, just as
placement
this.
on
And
his
let's
list.
do now an 8-note set. So let's go to octa chord, I think it will be called, from the drop-down list in superset. So just change that to octa. And if you scroll all the way down, it should say 828. Brilliant. And now if we go back to our list of pitch class sets, let's have a look at what it says on 828. Now, weirdly, it's in a different place, so I think you have to scroll up, and it's on the right-hand side.
Oh, I see. Oh,
which is really weird. I know, it's a bit strange. So if you keep going up.
Let me just do a find. 828.
Yeah.
There we go.
Find it. So if you, so it should say to the right of that octatonic scale.
Yep, sure enough.
So then you can click on that and it will lead you down a nice Wikipedia rabbit hole to find out what the octatonic scale is, and you can work that out as well. We've already
but yeah, we don't need to go there.
We don't need to go into that.
Yeah.
So so pitch class set theory, I mean, I know I've sort of slightly skirted over it, but I think we explained it reasonably well. And thank you so much for your hard
I think
work.
one thing that could bridge the gap even more is if like this is, you can apply pitch class set theory to anything. So like you even just like a major scale, right? So like it's not just something for like all the chords that are weird, all the scales that are weird.
Absolutely.
And if you just and if you just really thought of it like as in this mathematical way of just if a C is 0, C sharp is 1, D is 2, D sharp is 3, you could just say like, oh, so if a C major chord, if it's like C, E, G, oh, that would be like 0, 4, 7. And sure enough, that is like the pitch class set for a major chord.
Major triad, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, a major triad, yeah. And so it scales. It can be as complicated or simple as you want, but I think this makes it easier. I think the numbers make it easier to understand, like transposition almost, because if you just think of like in math, well, I think I was like explaining this on a live stream, which is why I already have some little drawings. Like it's like you take the same shape as something, but just move it to a different place, right? So, if you just added 3 to all the numbers, and you could see how like 0 doesn't have to be C. You could start 0 at E and just scale it up in the same way. If this is 0, then F becomes 1, then F sharp becomes 2, etc.
Yeah.
So it's actually a very simple, in a way of considering music, because all the letters can be confusing sometimes, especially since like there's no sharp between E and F, but that's supposed to be a half step, just like F. So
It is actually, I mean, and usually there are no zeros in music theory because, when you're doing intervals, you always count from one, but you never count from zero. And actually there are zeros in music theory. So it can be a little bit confusing, but I think you've explained it tremendously well. I mean, and you're right. So, for example, I've done little cheat sheets myself going, well, what chords are sort of from an octatonic scale or a Hungarian minor scale, which is just the same as a melodic minor scale, but with a sharp 4. So, for example, that, if you've just heard the Rings of Power theme at the end of episode 8, it's based on a Hungarian minor scale, at least at first. That sort of thing. So it's a way of going, okay, is Williams aware of all these? And I suspect he is. I think his early training with Castelnuovo Tedeschi, he must have covered an octatonic scale or a hexatonic scale. And it's particularly apt because a lot of them, especially the octatonic scale, works very nicely as a hand position. So, and you can try all of this at home, everybody. If you've got a keyboard near you, if you put your left hand on all the white notes, or let's do a C major chord with your left hand. So, Chris, I'm going to ask you to do this. So, if you play a C major chord with your left hand, if you can.
C major?
Yep, perfect. And now play an F sharp major chord.
With my right hand?
With your right hand, yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Right. So together, and that is the sound of the octatonic scale, actually, and also the sound of Petrushka. And originally Petrushka was, I think, supposed to be about a puppet, wasn't it? Or I think it is about a puppet who comes to life. And I imagine the hands on the keyboard are almost, they're puppet-like, manipulating the strings of the puppet's hands. And often, I think Stravinsky once said, fingers are great inspirers. In other words, his musical ideas have come
I feel that
from,
way.
I think it's from an interview. I'll find the reference for it somewhere, but it was an interview he did in a big book years ago, and basically kind of revealed his mechanism for working, which is he improvises at the piano, discovers these interesting sets, and goes, and it's the whole basis for the entire score is the octatonic scale. Obviously, it wasn't something he invented. That was through a lot of work in the Russian school, Rimsky-Korsakov, for example, and others, especially in the folk tradition. But, Williams would have been aware of that. And there are so many instances of using that octatonic scale in his work and being inspired by the hand position. So one thing that, I'm just going to go back to this for the time being. One thing that Mark Richards did, which is fantastic in his course, I don't quite know whether I'm able to do it here, but I'll give it a go, was he was talking about drawing some of the notes, a diminished chord, and then having another diminished chord, semitone apart, but from the same set, like that. So, for example, having D diminished, so having that on the bottom, like that, and then let's put that in voice 2. And then having this one over the top of it. Now, remember I said, oh dear, that looks a bit hopeless, doesn't it? Let's try and do that and do that. But remember I said something about major sevenths?
Yes.
There's one in there, and it's the start of each of those diminished sevenths, isn't it? So one diminished seventh starts on D, the other one starts on C sharp. Now, notice the difference between that and that. Oh, they're kind of the same. And, this was a thing that was discovered by Bartók, that if you have those diminished chords and you superimpose them and you use, let's say, at least 3 notes from one and 1 note from the other, you can create these really unusual types of, in fact, that's slightly the wrong one. It should be that one. Suddenly, we're in John Williams territory.
Yes.
And that's how he creates these really extraordinary chords and brings us all the way back to this 532, what I've called alpha chord set. So Bartók called it, or I think Ernst Lenvai, who was the main scholar on Bartók, called it the alpha chord. Just another arbitrary name, but it just means two superimposed diminished sevenths where you have different notes from each, and they create a chord complex or a bitonal chord. If you've heard The Rite of Spring, it's another example of a sort of type, alpha chord type. And the main defining feature of it is that major seventh, and then filling it up with other octatonic notes. And that's how he gets his spice. That's how he gets that brutality, which he's marked, brutal. Well, I've marked it brutal anyway.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
For myself more than anything. So, okay, so an alpha chord is like the sort of like a vertically stacked octatonic, or like two diminished sevenths. And you said that major seventh needs to be present, but not all 8 notes. All 8 notes have to be present. So which ones can be dropped?
So
or which ones are important?
It's a thing. It basically is an experiment.
Oh, okay.
You kind of have to try and experiment a little bit to see what can be dropped.
Okay.
And what can't be dropped. And what can't be dropped is the major seventh.
Yeah.
That has to be there. And often you find Williams using even fewer notes, and later on he uses just 3 notes, I think. It's going to be here somewhere, but it's going to take me a while to find it.
Where it still registers as an alpha chord.
Yeah, kind of. It's an alpha chord type, but it's
implied.
Not. Yeah, so here, for example, I mean, this is a good example. It's just that. And
okay. Sorry.
Basically, that's kind of your seventh, because it's the same as a second. So it's still there. So that, which I call 3/3, and there are lots of different types of it. But, often it's a major minor dyad. So you could have, if I started on C, middle C, so let me just do this. So I've got a C there, and I add a minor third, that's halfway there, and then I add another major third, starting from the same thing. You've got that, a minor third and a major third together. That's one of Williams's favourite type of chords. Especially when it's that. And guess what that is? Major seventh or diminished octave. So, and here, we've got it here. So, sorry, it's difficult to actually just click on the notes. There we go. That's the same chord. So the building block of that alpha chord is kind of that one, and then you can add other notes to it.
Yeah.
In fact, actually, any note will do. Really, it kind of doesn't make that much difference. Which is why sometimes he doesn't always be consistent with, I'm just going to use the octatonic scale. Like all good composers, he goes, okay, we need a bit of difference here. And that's a good example here, where it's not quite octatonic, but it's kind of almost there. Mostly planing with this particular set. So later on, anytime you hear it's going to be planing parallel movement with the same chord type. So here he's got a slightly different variant here, where he's got sort of E major, E minor, and then D flat 5 just as a dyad. Same chord. Weird, isn't it? That's the same pitch content or interval content as the very first bars, but it's a complete different chord. Here we've got an E minor chord, so it starts there, and then we've got a minor third away from the root, a perfect fifth. It's weird that's the same chord complex.
Fingers are great inspirers.
Fingers are great inspirers. And that's how he does it. A lot of it is kind of instinctive, I think, because he's so ingrained in, in the 1950s, he must have done every score, must have had an octatonic scale in it somewhere. He's been doing it already for 35 years at this point, or however long it was, 30 years or so. So he knows what he's doing. They're not just random pitches, and it's not just a cluster.
Right.
And I think it's really useful to explain how he gets these notes, because composers, or, especially when you're learning, you might go, well, where do the notes come from? What do I do?
Yeah.
And my advice would be, okay, well, having that major seventh is crucial because it gives you that sort of rub. Having major chords and minor chords at the same time, that's going to give you that sort of logic, I guess, which makes sense of that cluster. It's not just a cluster, it's an octatonic, specifically an octatonic cluster. But once you set it up, even if you play into something which is not quite the same, it kind of is, because it's the same DNA in there. We still got that little 3-note set where you have the major seventh, and then there's a minor third below the top note as a voice 2.
You're preserving a lot of the relationships.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. And the only way of really discovering this was to go very deep into the material and kind of just analyze every note.
I'm so glad that you've done this, because
well, thank you.
It just really, it can be tempting and easy, and I mean, I certainly do it myself, where like hearing too much of that, it's sort of like it would take so much work to get into it that it's easy to skip over and get to the part that's more tonal, or some part that's easier to grasp onto. But it's really important to understand. It's really important to understand.
It is, and actually, and the reason I spent so much time on it, or we've spent so much time on it, is that that scale forms the basis of the entire cue. I mean, completely. Yes, he occasionally diverts away from it, but really, all of the material is derived. Those little bits at the beginning give rise to everything else. I mean, even that theme. Let's look at it. That's all octatonic. He might change it at the end, but at least the material is derived from the original octatonic scale. So
it's so rewarding when you figure that out.
It's amazing, I know. And then you sort of have this revelatory experience, and you think, oh my God, I actually know what he's doing. Fantastic.
Yeah.
And there are some other things. So, here we got a really good example of something called heterophony, where you get a sort of slightly varied rhythmic pattern, but of the same kind of sets, the same melodic material. So here, it's just quarter note, quarter note, quarter note in terms of beats.
Yeah.
And here we got half note beats. And the reason I think that some of these anomalous notes, so some notes which are not part of the octatonic thing, is because, well, the chords are changing at twice the rate of the second counterpoint. So, if you play this
it's
with
like a messed up round.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Let's see whether it works. It's sort of, but it kind of works, because at least the last note and the first note coincide with each other. The mess happens in the middle, doesn't it? It's like the sort of,
when one's traveling faster than the other.
Yes. Something's gone wrong with my sandwich at that point. It's just sort of... So that's basically it. And then we get on to all the thematic materials. So the main theme, again, Mr. Lehman, have a drink, is the J theme, he's called it. So this main theme, and little rhythmic variations of the same pattern. And the whole thing is like a sort of trudging, but it's an atat, isn't it? I mean, basically that's what he's got going on musically. It's a form of, I guess, musical onomatopoeia almost. It's very literal. And I love things when they're like that. 2 contrabassoons, by the way. Let's all celebrate the contrabassoon. And
so in the liner notes, in the original trilogy liner notes, it says, Imperial Walkers is a hostile cue that accompanies the initial onslaught of the menacing all-terrain armored transports. Williams reveals that the piece has unusual orchestration, calling for 5 piccolos, 5 oboes, a battery of 8 percussion. I know you said the 5 piccolos wasn't quite right, but 5 oboes, a battery of 8 percussion, 2 grand pianos, 2 or 3 harps, in addition to the normal orchestral complement. This was necessary in order to achieve a bizarre, mechanical, brutal sound for the sequence. So, brutal, mechanical.
Yeah. I mean, it's nice that, it's very reassuring, isn't it, that composers know exactly what they're doing. You don't just sort of suddenly make something up on the spot. They've pre-composed things. There's a whole conceptualization that occurs before writing anything. Obviously, you then experiment and then you settle on something. And he thought, okay, I'm going to settle on this. Not forgetting that, of course, the previous cue set up our octatonic information with... And that leads on to... It's amazing. It's the same thing, but he's just using it in a completely different way, which is in itself fascinating. It has all of these endless possibilities. Mm-hmm. So we start off with this, extraordinary bit. And actually, it's very difficult to hear any of that sort of timp on the film soundtrack at all. Timpani. Just don't really hear it. But it's still going on. So then we go on to basically the main theme again is repeated in the trumpets, of which there are 4. So it's a slightly larger trumpet section. Usually there would be 3, I guess. So
Sounds
4 trumpets, right. Quite big. And he also has 6 horns instead of 4 in a normal symphony orchestra. The horn section has got bigger and bigger since 1980, hasn't it? I think of now it's about 8 minimum.
You need an extra row.
Was Hans Zimmer had something like 24 double basses in one of his recent Dunkirk films or something like that. Yeah, I don't think it made it to the film, but he at least recorded them to try and find out what it sounded like. But
that's cool.
Like a swarm of angry bees, I would imagine. So we got this sort of octatonic work, and the amazing thing is that virtually everything on that page is from that scale. That's why I haven't bothered notating it, because it would just be covered in red ink.
Yeah.
Everything is from it. So we got all of these different combinations here, and it keeps trudging away with all of these syncopated things.
Listener. Yeah. That's...
Yeah. And then these sort of interjections, this sort of... and often he'll have flute, oboe, and often xylophone with it as well. Mm-hmm. So that we can have this. In this case, he's also got a gong swiped with a metal, probably a triangle beater or something, I'd imagine.
Oh.
And cymbals and bass drum and 2 snares as well. So you've got this extraordinary sort of, combination going on where, everything is just happening at the same time. So you've got this sort of brutal rhythm with like that, and then all of this sort of I can't play it because I don't have enough fingers.
Yeah.
I did it. And it's just really gnarly, and it's meant to be. And at the same time, you've also got this other tune going on as this is going. But da da da. But da. I mean, is there anything that's actually on the beat? Nothing there.
Very little.
Very little, and often on weaker parts of the bar as well. So, bar beat 1 being the strongest, beat 4 is the weakest. That's the one that's accented, of course.
Right.
But he does have some stability. So, when you combine it with the bass line, which is clever, and obviously you've still got the piano. I won't play that because it'll just be deafening. And he's just slightly going to... We can tell that he's gone from a C-sharp territory into more of a D territory at that point. But it's kind of ambiguous because he's oscillating between D and C-sharp. Mm-hmm. But it's just a way of him sort of... And also making it not the same. The temptation, especially when you're working in DAW, is just sort of bit of copy and paste.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
You kind of need to edit some of those notes. And it's just his way of the editing process to make any ostinato material that he has continuously developed or continuously varied, shall we say.
Yeah.
Absolutely the same thing in Phantom Menace. He does it all the time. So when you've got this sort of... He'll just do that, just slightly differently harmonize the end bit of it. You know,
Right.
so
Rather
it's
than
just a
keeping
way
it
of
thirds all
doing
the way
that.
through.
Yeah.
You've probably seen his sketches more than I have. Since he doesn't use a DAW, when he has like ostinato passages, does he tend to just mark when it changes?
Yeah.
Okay.
So he'll do that symbol. Generally, you
Yeah,
can see
gotcha.
that very clearly.
Yeah.
So yeah, often it will just be the same thing and just go repeat.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, the amazing thing with Williams, and I have seen some of those scores, some of those manuscripts, is that they're so detailed that all the orchestrator kind of needs to do is just check that they've got the right notes, because the handwriting can be a little bit difficult to decipher.
Yeah.
And especially some of the orchestrators, there are mistakes. Even in the orchestrators things that obviously got changed in the recording session. There's a good example of it. I think I discovered one because me and a colleague were having a look. Yes, it's this bit here. So I'll get to that.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, this kind of just chugs along anyway, and then we're into a D harmonic minor territory, and then suddenly we've got these crazy sort of horn parts that go like this. Like, yeah, like that.
Yeah.
And you don't really hear the top note, but guess what? They're all octatonic chords.
Mm-hmm.
And this ostinato here, which is again, all of this sort of 532, occasionally you'll go into a slightly different pitch set, but it's kind of the same thing. Almost, I think it's sort of almost elephantine, isn't it? Like a trunk, sort of elephant's trunk going, you know, blaring out.
Yeah.
And I think that must have been a conscious decision with the ATAT design, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, it's very it's reminiscent of the piano part, obviously.
Yeah. So I think the error came in here where it actually goes up. Like there. Because most people would have just copied that. It's just one chord that changes at the end.
Wait. Is what you have notated what you hear in the film?
That's what I think I hear in the film. I don't know whether I'm right. I think I'm right, but I don't know whether I am. So if we play...
Let's ground this in
Yeah.
playing from the film.
I'll find out where you are.
Okay.
Echo Station 5-7. We're on our way. All right, boys, keep tight now.
Luke, I have no approach vector. I'm not set.
Steady, Dak. Attack pattern Delta.
Go now.
The xylophones.
Yeah.
All right, coming in.
So we're not quite there yet.
Yeah.
Bobby, you still with me?
So here we are.
Ah, okay. Oh wow, you can barely hear it.
Barely
Over
hear it, but just keep going. You're almost at that point.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to play it then.
No, that's okay.
But yeah, it just sort of... sorry, I just pressed the space bar by mistake.
That's all good.
But yeah, it just goes up. It just gives you that little bit of da-da-dee-da, like a little bit of, again, that sort of positive forward momentum movement.
Yeah.
And then we're back into, another popular chord that he has, which is this minor chord with the major seventh. Brilliant one. You know, that.
Is that related to the Death Star
Barely play
emoji?
it. That one is... It could be. Which...
I'm trying to remember.
What do you mean
off
from
the
A
top
New
of my
Hope?
I have this stuck in my head
It's
now.
definitely...
Yeah.
It's definitely a chord that he uses again and again and again and again. So you could relate it to virtually any part of anything that he does, quite frankly. But yes, it's definitely a sort of imperial type of chord because it's minor and it has that sort of... But notice that
It's James Bond adjacent.
Seventh... Yes. Yeah. Mr. Bond, I hear the countdown. So we've got this sort of E minor chord, but I love the fact the seventh is like the bottom note of it.
Yeah.
And again, you get that sort of what Thomas Newman calls the rub. You've got that really semitonal sort of rub going on. And of course, that is just the same as that. It's the same thing. It's actually the same chord. It's the same set. A minor second is the same as a major seventh because you can invert them and they're the same notes. So another really clever way of kind of expanding the content, but by making very small changes. Oh, look at that.
Well, I was going to show just, I know there's probably people listening that are like, why are minor second and major seventh the same?
Fair question.
Yeah. So like if we take, oh, you can't hear that. Can you hear that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep,
I can't, but I can see it. So that's fine. So this is G, and an F sharp. So this would be considered a major seventh. And if you just take, because we take it as a given that all of the G's are the same pitch, same pitch class. You could just take this F sharp and instead put it an octave lower. And then there you go, minor second. Except this time the F sharp is on the bottom. So that's why these are the same pitch class. Yeah, if we're talking about pitch classes. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, equivalency, I think.
Equivalency.
Did we say equivalent? Yeah, something like that. I don't know.
Octave equivalency.
Yes. We're sounding like musicologists.
Oh, no.
I know, always be careful. But yeah, I mean, it's another way of him adding extra notes to things, but usually those notes are kind of planned, 4/19. Actually, I'm not sure that is octatonic. I think it's actually hexatonic, but let's not quibble about things. But he often uses it, and often uses, bass lines to sort of cement that as well. So you still got this. Oh, I've just discovered just now a 3/3 set.
Oh.
So we've got our major seventh, and then we got the minor third beneath there. I know it doesn't look like a minor third, but it is E flat or D sharp to C. And interesting. And that's repeated as well. So he's using a set which I pointed out later. This one, 3/3. He's made it melodic and stretching it out. Fascinating, isn't it? It's just you always discover something new. I could be looking at this for years and I still wouldn't have scratched the surface of it. Just a quick aside, which I'm just going to swap screens for a little bit. The pianos are worth talking about. So this is some
Lots
of the
people
notated
on Twitter
stuff which
commented about them.
Yeah, which I did. So I mean, I can just play them for you, just so you can hear what difference it makes. I'll stop there because it just gets ridiculous.
That's so metal.
But basically, it's really metal, isn't it? And it's just adding huge amounts of weight. And then we get to the passage that we've just looked at actually here. So a lot of the time, interestingly enough, we can see that the piano's just... It's amazing. It's kind of just hinting at a bit of the percussive bits of the melody. So the violin is actually doing a longer line. So it misses out the, in fact, I think that's actually supposed to be a B flat. So it's an error on my part. So I'm just going to change that. Oh, that's very strange. I can't actually get rid of the flat for some reason. I don't know why. Anyway, whatever. I'll change it later.
Sibelius.
So annoying. Sibelius, honestly. So interesting stuff. It basically adds weight. It adds percussive an unusual percussive quality to everything. And it brings out all the things that you need to bring out because it's so dense.
Having two pianos is massive. It's just massive amounts of sound and notes because pianos have such a big range. They can go so, oh my gosh, just the sheer amount of like notes and power being added is tremendous.
Yeah. I once saw a performance of Sonata for two pianos and percussion in London, and George Schulte was playing one of the pianos. I think it was Murray Pariah was playing piano 2.
Oh, wow.
And Evelyn Glennie was on percussion, one of the percussion parts. And it was the most ridiculous concert I've ever been to. I think it was in the 1990s or something.
Did you need
but
earplugs?
It was just, not quite, but almost. It was quite brutal. Yeah, I mean, really astonishing. And all of that sort of material just sort of keeps going all the way through. I love the high strings, actually. I think that it gives it that sort of, something bad's going to happen type quality to it. And that chugs along as well. And then suddenly we're into this K theme again, which I'll just play again. Stop it there.
That part always like sticks out in my head when I'm listening.
Yeah.
Do, 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 do.
It's almost like a blues thing, isn't it?
It's like such a nice little chord outline suddenly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's very diminished, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, well, it's octatonic. There we go.
Once
you start doing an octatonic thing, you start seeing it everywhere.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And then start having note dreams when you're doing these reductions.
I've had those.
Oh, it can get a little bit
weird.
Annoying. They are a bit weird. So after that, we've then got more material. So maybe again, let's take stock and move forward with
listening,
the recording.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll just pick up right where we stopped.
Yeah.
That armor's too strong for blasters.
There we go.
Rogue group, use your harpoons and tow cables. Go for the legs. It
This
might
is
be our
it.
only chance of stopping them.
Okay. Should I wind it down?
All right, stand
That's
by,
fine.
Dak.
Oh, Luke, we've got a malfunction in fire control. I'll have to cut in the auxiliary.
Just hang on. Hang on, Dak. Get ready to fire that tow cable.
Just stop it there. So it's a really good example of him ramping things up. Just things get louder, they get more busy, things get higher. He adds in more instruments. And if we look at this bar here, that's exactly what's happening. So suddenly the trombones come in after all the sort of, that K theme. And then we've got the trombones and 2 tubas, by the way, coming in.
Oh my gosh.
And then this craziness, which happens to be doubled by clarinets, all sort of dovetailing each other, by which I mean that the end of clarinet 1 might be the starting note for clarinet 3, then the clarinet 1 will drop out, and then clarinet 3 will play, and then the waterfall. Yeah. I love that, the waterfall. Lovely. I love that. But yeah, and also even sort of sometimes stretching things out. So he's adding an extra beat because, hang on, Dak, it will be all right. Or Dax, I think it is, isn't it?
Yeah, it is sort of just like proverbially like stretching out your hand and then just like reaching that extra little bit.
Yeah.
Except no hands were involved.
Absolutely. And also it's just going higher. If you want to increase tension, just go up.
Yeah.
And then he brings it sort of down again, slightly more mezzo forte, and then brings it back up into a big fortissimo, where things sort of suddenly cut out. And I think that's where things start going slightly wrong for Luke and Dax at that point. But yeah, let's keep going with it because it's all octatonic, all of this bit.
Okay.
And I love those chords coming up in a minute. That's really wonderful. Let's watch out for those.
Tiny side note, when Luke says, rogue group, use your harpoons, I cannot, now in the post-Mandalorian, I can't hear that and not hear him saying, Grogu, use your harpoons. It's ruined that line. Not ruined that line for me, but like, I wonder if they came up with a name for Grogu just by like someone messing up rogue group. Oh my gosh. Okay. Anyway.
I love that. You never know. It could have happened.
Could have. All right, here we go.
Dak!
Oh, I just missed
Hey,
it.
that's another elephant part.
Yeah. And look, they're even going higher. So from A all the way up there, I mean, that is high for a horn.
Yeah.
It's really high for a horn.
The effort.
And you can
it
hear the
sounds effortful.
strain.
Exactly.
Oh,
yeah.
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 Yeah, absolutely. So we've got more octatonic stuff. We've also got sometimes, more rubs. We've got sometimes, not quite, it's a slightly different, another sort of slightly different chord, but another one. What often is called a flat six.
Yes.
So you just have a major chord, but have a flat six. We find all over the place in Star Wars, everywhere. So, but the Starry Night sequence at the beginning of the whole film,
Yes.
is that chord. In fact, that sort of kind of defines Star Wars. Flat six, that's it. Flat six, octatonic, hexatonic chords. There we go, done.
So, are you familiar with the solo soundtrack very much?
Not as much, actually, I have to confess.
Okay, yeah.
But
I wasn't
it's
until
still,
doing a whole season
it's
on it.
Phenomenal. Yeah.
So there's this part in Into the Maw that reminds me of this, and so I have it ready to play.
Oh, brilliant.
And it's 40. Okay, it's 43 seconds, and so
Fantastic.
and that happens a few times, like that sort of. Except they used vuvuzelas, but
Yeah, it's definitely there, isn't it? It's definitely a hint of that.
yeah.
Absolutely. And actually, John Powell intimately knows how Williams does all of this stuff. And I think, it's not a secret doing octatonic music or 6-note scales or Hungarian minor things. They all know what's going on.
And I mention it because John Powell, mentions in interviews like that he has put in John Williams Easter eggs here and there.
Yeah.
So like he's like, I dare you to find them. So I don't know, maybe that's one of them.
And I do that as a composer as well. I mean, I once wrote a piece, which was actually a serial piece, believe it or not, which I wouldn't normally write, to be honest. But I embedded Bach's name in it and then used the row, every other note was part of a Bach fugue, which I think was... that something like that. I don't know what it was, but it's a very chromatic subject. So I thought, it's conducive to this, and then just sort of embedded it somewhere in the, each variation when it came round again. So I like things like that, little Easter eggs. I think it's important.
Yeah.
And it kind of keeps, it makes you smile, especially when nobody gets it. I'm sure Bear McCreary's done it with Rings of Power. I bet you he has.
Yeah.
So wonderful sort of this elephantine sort of horn things, which keep going. And again, that just repeats. I love it. I don't know about you, Xanthi, but as a violinist, do you like playing those fast, those really fast double quaver type things, semi-quaver?
Oh, I'm so glad that
notes.
I'm so glad that you mentioned. Okay, I can't. Is this the one that I was? Let's see. Let me just read off of your screen. Is that in B flat?
Yeah.
So I do.
Quite awkward, isn't it?
That this one is
There's
characteristically awkward because I was going to bring up one. I don't remember where it is. There's a part where we get it before, and where I was going to comment on how like idiomatic it feels, how easy it feels. Let's see. What am I thinking of? Well, maybe I'm thinking of Leia's instructions. I don't know. There was a different part where I was like playing.
Was it here? Was it this D harmonic minor?
Oh yeah. Have we not gotten there yet? Wait.
I think we went past it, sadly.
Okay. Yeah. So that one is like that's that. Yes. This one's good. Is that what it is? Is it an F? Okay.
Yeah.
Because I don't have to move my hand. Like I stay in the same basically setup until there's it changes a little bit at the end. But things like this definitely fun. When there's like string crossings, not as fun. But in general, I don't mind. Like I like dugga-duggas. The technical term for these. I somehow I like them when they are a little bit short-lived. When they are accented, so there's a sense of pulse. It feels like a little bit more thankless, I think, when it's just just an amorphous texture. And you know,
it's good to move, in other words, isn't it? It's good to have those moving notes in quavers.
It is good to move. And I think for me, it depends on the context. Sometimes I like things like this just because it's kind of keeps me alert, keeps me awake, keeps me alert, But I think I would, if I were playing this, I think I would feel pretty alert as it is.
Oh, yeah. I'd be counting like mad, going, "Oh no, there's a 3/2 bar here." Quick.
In that case, I would like those parts just because I wouldn't get lost there.
So yeah, I love those bits. I always use them for especially when you get a note from a director saying, "Can I have a bit more energy?" They mean semiquavers.
16ths
often. Yeah, 16ths.
Yeah.
16ths.
Yes, we love it. And you're a violinist too. Right?
Yes, I guess originally, but not as good as you. I never played professionally. I kind of stopped lessons at 20, 21. But composing kind of took over.
Good mental health tip.
Just kidding. Just getting it out. So anyway, we kind of miss them because they're very, very difficult to hear on the soundtrack. But I love this little scale which goes up. Just going into, that sort of basically another build. It's just wonderful, especially with all of that sort of trombone stuff. Yeah, absolutely tremendous. And it weirdly acts as a sort of almost like a tonic, as a dominant preparation for it goes to C. It's just like,
look at that.
Basically, it goes here. So if I play that just on the piano.
Oh my goodness.
And then keeps going.
That's a ridiculous
It's ridiculous, isn't it? And I put cluster splurge on downbeat.
Yeah, sounds about right.
Because it's got let's look at it. We've got a B flat. We've got a B natural. We've got a B flat, D, C sharp, A, and all of that going on. So it just goes. It's just like.
What is this right now?
But again, it's one of
What's
those.
This piece? Oh, of course, it's Rim's B chords. Right? Wait, no.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of the part. No, Bald Mountain.
Yes, Mussorgsky.
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and even the same kind of thing, really. All octatonic madness. And I love this sort of and what's weird is that he's got all of this sort of sludge, this sort of cluster notes, and again they're all octatonic, they're all kind of 3/3 type things. But then if you look at the outline, it's just an E flat major chord. How does that happen? It's genius.
Wow.
And then suddenly that J theme comes out of nowhere. It just suddenly appears. So we've got this extraordinary repeated, but it's just sort of like almost like a plunge. If you're driving in a car and you go over a bump and like you kind of everything goes upwards and the car goes downwards. It's like that sort of feeling of being suspended in air for a little bit. Really extraordinary. That's it. So so we're on the M theme at that point, and then suddenly it goes into the J theme, which is just tremendous.
So is this
and then he combines them.
Is this a new set here?
Yeah.
Is that why? Okay.
Yeah. So it's a new section at this point. So let's maybe go back to the work and pick it up as well. I'll try and find where you last went from.
Okay.
There we go. Here we go.
Oh,
That's it.
Yes, Lord Vader. I've reached the main power generators. The shield will be down in moments. You may start your landing.
Rogue 3!
Copy, Rogue Leader.
Wait, I've lost my gunner. You'll have to take this shot. I'll cover for you.
Set your harpoon. Follow me on the next pass.
So let's just stop
that
there.
part is so interesting where things are spinning out of control.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's just and you got Julian Glover as General Veers. It will be down in moments, Lord Vader. He's just so commanding, and it's great to have a sort of Shakespearean actor of such renown
Yes.
doing, a very small role, but he kind of makes an impression. Very sort of stiff, the way he projects his voice and things. It's really, extraordinary. But yeah, I just love that theme, that J theme. Da-da-da-dum, da-da-da-da-ba-bum. And of course, it's a variation of. But here it's almost like a sort of, whoa, we might die. Sort of like, almost sort of gallows humor almost. Yeah. And then it goes into this extraordinary quasi almost atonal. I think he calls it the O theme, Frank. Have a drink, Lehman.
Yes.
But a lot of these sets are based on this pattern here. So again, all of these major sevenths, you can see hopefully at this point that A flat, but here, and I think it goes up, doesn't it? It's just really extraordinary. I mean, if I play it just on its own, it's just crazy. And then he does actually have clusters. So it just gets more and more crazy and atonal as we go along.
Have you seen sketches for this part?
Yeah.
Does he notate the
all
clusters, or is it like? Oh, okay, all right.
No, it'll just
so
say
it's not just a hand
lowest
smash.
cluster.
I see.
No.
Oh, okay.
He just say he will say lowest cluster.
Oh, okay. So it is.
No, this was just I just wanted to sort of just have random notes in there just so I could
course.
actually hear it, because if
Yes.
you write it in Sibelius,
It's not.
you then got to hide the voice too. Yeah.
Yeah. I got
All
it.
sort of.
So yeah. So on the actual, yeah. So on the actual score, there's not even notes there. It's just like do a key
It'll
smash.
just be a cross
Do
and
a
just go lowest
back.
cluster. Yeah, absolutely. And interestingly enough, actually at that point, the other piano cuts out, because then it's almost too much to have both, because you've then got these strings going on, which are playing long whole notes, which has this extraordinary. I'll just play it on its own. I mean, let's just listen to this on its own, just on piano. And then it goes back into the main theme. I mean, it's just absolutely extraordinary. And almost all of them are octatonic subsets. Some are Hungarian minor ones, but I think at this stage, he's kind of making it up as he goes along. I don't think he's going, oh, hello, I'm going to use this subset or anything. He just wants it to... Often, the outer notes form a seventh. Not always, but they kind of do. If you look at that, we're almost there. So that's actually an octave, which is unusual. And then a major seventh there,
Minor
octave
seventh.
again. And he's actually expanding the intervallic content here up to a minor ninth at that point. So he's it's an interval expansion, what you would call a divergent progression, where you start in one interval and you just sort of like crescendo and widen the interval. There was a wonderful piece by an English composer called David Matthews, which starts off, and it just like that. And just the intervals just get wider and wider, and it's for voice. It's an amazing, amazing piece. And it's all about a seed that grows into a plant that grows into a tree.
Oh,
that
do you have a name?
It's just can't remember it. Sorry.
Okay. Sorry.
I'll try and find it. But it just occurs to me that that's a technique that's used quite a lot. And of course, then we've got all of this other material, which is mostly drawn from octatonic, but not quite. It's not quite. It's very, very discordant. So it's really chromatic. I mean, it's atonal at that point. And then we've got all these sort of very high woodwinds, and then it comes back into the, bum, blup, bum, blup, blup, with more octatonic clusters. And all of these things here are all set 532. They're all planed, and he just does the same thing as he did before, back again. Yeah.
It's cool that he has these
keeps...
It's cool that he has these like little bits of little cells of, I guess, of music, and can kind of put the puzzle pieces in different places.
Yeah, it's a sort of modular way of composing where you have little modules of sound which you can then build in blocks. And then once you've got the blocks, as you say, you can just puzzle them together. Absolutely, like a jigsaw. Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, it's strange because I guess as composers, often you're taught to have, through composition and make your ideas develop and develop and develop, like a sort of sonata. But in this case, it's more sort of blocks of sound, which are then simply one after each other, which then perhaps relate. Actually, it's a sort of technique that Messiaen used in an obscure piece called Et Expecto Resurrectionem Mortuorum. What?
I've never actually heard of that.
Yes. Et Expecto for short. It's a wind, brass, and percussion piece.
Oh, that's why.
Yeah. So
I need to
no
get better
strings involved,
on that side of. Yeah.
Yeah. But often, it's sort of structurally, it's strange because it doesn't do like an A form. It's just A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D. That's it. It just repeats things. It's a really fascinating way of looking at it. And you get this sort of rather monolithic sort of Stonehenge type sort of structure to things.
But why does something like this, whereas like something like Duel of the Fates feels modular as well, in that the layers, I mean, this feels like a different kind of modular. So
yeah, so this one I think it's more vertical. So like the whole thing can be just sort of like you can put a box around everything and then just transport it somewhere else. Whereas Duel of the Fates is layered,
horizontal lines,
more like rock strata formation. So you might have a sort of sand at the bottom, and then you might have rock and then earth and stuff like that. Yep. And that's kind of how that's built up. Whereas this tends to be, it's rare that you get that, but without anything else. That usually goes with that. So that they're more sort of blocky rather than separated out.
That's a great visual. Yeah.
I think, that's kind of a way I think of looking at it. And then we've got this Q theme, climactic. Another Frank Lehman.
He calls it climactic trumpet line echoed by pseudo canon in trombones derived from motif M. Anticipates. Yeah. Oh, that's right. Anticipates catastrophe motif from The Last Jedi.
Yeah. So I'll play it just on the piano. I mean, it is really sort of. There's something really magisterial about it, isn't it? There's sort of, it's just so grand, especially these incredible sort of low D notes. Ba-bom. And look at the leap from that.
Yeah, can you play that again?
Yeah. So again, just on
the piano.
Actually, I'll play it I'll play it without the filigree at the top. It's kind of distracting, all of that the filigree, isn't it? So I'm going to get rid of it.
I've never heard someone use the word filigree like this. So.
it's a name which was said to be by Ed Buller, who is a wonderful friend of mine, producer, composer extraordinaire, and he worked with Hans Zimmer for a long time as well, basically as a sort of synth programmer mainly, but he's also done a lot of orchestral work as well. And he used to say filigree, which is this sort of florid, usually woodwind lines, which are kind of fluttery. So it's either this sort of fluttery sort of tremolando type things, but actually, trills essentially, or the other sort of filigree that you get where you get these sorts of things, little sort of semi-quaver or 16th note lines, that sort of thing. But I love the term because it sort of describes it nicely. I think it's like the little gold glitter that you get over things.
In my DAW, when I'm like making stuff, for all the parts that I add that are like that, I write frills and trills.
Yeah, we all have a name. Yeah, and sometimes if it's dark, it's issues and tissues. Issues and tissues.
Oh my gosh, that's funny.
So and so this builds up again. We've now got sort of interrupted texture, which then builds up with this sort of huge sort of thirds going up. And those sorts of things, at the end, again, he's not just using the scale. He's doing something a little bit different at the end. Once is okay, twice memorable, third time, kind of change it. And it's another good example of doing that. Again, we've got our little fast digga-digga-digga-dis. And then suddenly an extraordinary chord, which again, in this case, actually, it's an augmented chord, which is actually quite unusual to just have. Oh, we've got just an augmented chord.
Yeah, just straight
there
up.
hasn't been one until that moment. Then a percussion solo where you've got sort of tuned drums, snare drum, cymbals, bass drum, and timpani all going on at the same time. And then suddenly it's that detached, it's the bit leading up to detach cable. And I think there was a bit of editing with it because it wasn't quite, the cue wasn't long enough. So they actually had to cut some of it and then, basically stretch it out for an extra few beats.
Just look at that visually. Visually, this looks so different.
It's crazy. Everything is absolutely, homophonic, essentially, block chord homophony. My old teacher used to say. So.
Happening at the same time.
And let's just have a listen to it. And then ludicrousness afterwards.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah,
imagine being a trumpet player there.
Oh God, yeah. But also,
quadruple.
Here, that major seventh is still there.
So alpha chords. Oh, I see. Yeah, alpha chord. Yeah.
Yeah, and this one is very much the 4-note chord, which is a major minor chord. Hence why I put a large M for major and a small m for minor. So A minor, major. But he often puts, the major bit element in the bass and then has the minor version over the top. It doesn't work as well if you have the major chord at the top and the minor version. That just sounds wrong, whereas sounds a bit more edgy.
It does.
Weird, isn't it?
It does.
I can't explain it. I think it's just that, a minor ninth is considered more dissonant than a major seventh. So usually a major seventh is the one that you go for. But yeah, it's just one of those crazy things, I guess. All planed, and then it keeps building up. And then we've got this absolutely crazy sort of bit of music at this point where you've got all sorts of different things. So you've got F at the top. And then we've got C sharp minor like that. So 620 is the classic hexatonic set. So instead of an 8-note chord, we've now got a 6-note set, which goes minor second, minor third, like that. How many notes is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Good, I've got it right. Still got it. But you can get, minor chords like that, for example, like that. So in this case, he's actually got slightly different notes. So he's got an F at the top, which he's got here, and then he's got C sharp minor, as well as a combination. And it's just another of those symmetrical scales that he uses. Not often, actually, in Empire. I mean, it occurs quite a lot in Phantom Menace, because there's lots of augmented sort of mystery. Oh, what's going on?
Right.
Again, you'll come before us, your highness. You know, all of this sort of like horrible sort of droid trade federation people. And they're all sort of very augmented. That's kind of what they are. So it's actually quite unusual to have that set here. Most of them are actually semitone related. So the other set that he uses often by semitones. So what I mean by that is that you have a chord, could be major or minor, and they have another chord that's a semitone below it. Like that. So when and that really is a sound of Williams, isn't it? I mean, that sounds like that. And often he has them in second inversion, in other words, with the fifth of the original root in the bass. When I say in the bass, I mean the lowest sounding note. So C sharp minor, the fifth of that chord, it is the lowest note. And again with F, the fifth of that chord is also the lowest note. And he uses that resonance a lot, having those fourths and then the third above.
It's so interesting.
Yeah.
The sense of the fourths on the bottom is very strong.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's very
and it
tangible.
kind of relates. It is, yeah. And he does use that quite a lot. I think he just likes the hand position. I think it's as simple as that. You know, I don't think it's anything. And the resonance of it. There's something.
You know, I like that hand
rather
position
sort of,
too.
Yeah. But it's quite satisfying, isn't it? Thumb 3 and 5.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically. No, I'm sure there's a Messiaen piece that starts off like that. And then it goes back into the usual J theme, this time with sort of chugging sort of piano. And then we're kind of at the end of the cue. And again, he's still using that planing figure. And then we're on to the very final few seconds of the thing. I know we've kind of run over by about 2 hours.
Should I play
going.
it?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay.
I'm going to bring it up.
Steady, Roku. Activate harpoon.
I'm just going to go straight to the next one.
Good shot, Jensen.
So building up.
One more pass. Coming around. Watch.
The block chords.
I love how the speeder is like harmonized with it too.
Let her go.
Yeah.
Detach cable. Cable detached. Come on. That got him. I see it, Wedge. Good work.
I don't think we can protect 2 transports at a time.
It's
Here we
risky,
are.
but we can't hold out much longer. We have no choice.
Launch patrol.
Evacuate remaining ground staff.
No! This one goes there, that one goes there, right?
Artu, you take good care of Master Luke now, understand? And do take good care of yourself.
Droids.
Oh.
Oh dear.
Oh man, that's the end of the minutes. Wow.
I know. I mean, it's amazing. I love C-3PO. I mean, he's just
My favorite droid. I am team C-3PO.
Oh, I am as well. I'm with you, 100%. I mean, and
glad
I love
not
the
to have
fact
another
there's that
hater on
little-
the show. No, I'm just kidding.
No, not at all. And he's just, don't leave me. I mean, I say that in polite conversation
earnest.
occasionally. Exactly.
In a C-3PO voice, I hope.
Don't leave me. Obviously as a joke, not as a, as a serious thing. But yeah, and that music is wonderful with it. And this time we're back into, interestingly, a sort of hexatonic or Hungarian minor. This is where it sort of gets weird, is that quite often you can find notes which are common to more than one scale. So in this instance, you know, the little droid theme, I love that. Which it definitely you sense almost sort of like a relaxation to a sort of, you know, that it doesn't do that, but it kind of feels as though it could do. So we've got sort of this, that sort of, like
yeah,
that.
that's right in there.
But also, we got also there's that as well. So you got definitely. I kind of favour the implied Hungarian minor because it explains all the notes.
I see. Okay.
I think Frank says it's hexatonic, but I mean, he's right, of course, but it's also Hungarian. You could also say it's Hungarian minor as well. It's one of those things where, you know, nobody's got the right answer. I mean, there isn't a right answer. There is more than one right answer.
Well, if tracing back to the first time we hear the droids, I mean, I don't know if since I know you're going out of order, but the first time we hear the droids, which one is it more? So do you still feel more Hungarian implied?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I think it is. I mean, part of it is because the accompaniment is doing this. So you've got the piano accompaniment and clarinets doing this. Because they're oscillating B flat to C flat, so B flat to B, or A sharp to B.
Yeah.
So, but there's no A sharp in the hexatonic here. So or B flat. Actually, there is, isn't there? There is one. Where was it? I'm sure there was a note that I was missing. Yeah, B natural. Sorry, there's no B natural there, but there is in the Hungarian minor. But I mean, you're not going to say, "Oh, it's definitely B Hungarian minor." It's not. I mean, there's no tonal center of B because we're kind of in D. So there's an ambiguity about what's happening.
Philosophical question: if you're how do you decide whether to take the melody alone or to bring along the accompaniment with it? Do you ever find it appropriate to analyze them as distinct?
I think so sometimes, yeah, because often he separates out the forces for melody and harmony. So it might be brass harmony, but nothing else doing the harmony. Melody is just the strings and the wind and nothing else. So sometimes it's then important to kind of do both. So the wind is doing this above the brass that's doing this.
So the orchestration matters in your...
So the orchestration matters, I think, yeah.
Okay.
But you can sort of, I mean, in this instance, I thought, well, actually it makes no sense to separate the harmony at this point from it because it's giving that sort of, no, it's that you know, you're kind of missing an important factor if you don't have all of those notes.
Well, plus they're all woodwinds.
Yeah.
Here.
And piano as well. Yeah. Or electric piano, actually.
Electric piano.
Yeah.
Oh, that's I do. Okay.
It's like a sort of type of Rhodes sound, but without being like you know, lots of air. Yeah. Basically, it's not sort of quite kind. You know, it has that quality to it. And then has, you know, often you can see the overriding harmony in the harps, and he's got that B natural or C flat aspect there, which is there, but it isn't in that hexatonic. So I kind of think, well. Yeah, you just have to use your judgment, I guess, I think. And then if somebody questions it, you've got to come up with a good reason for why you chose it. So as long as you can find the evidence for it, and you're not just cherry picking and making it up, then I think you're kind of okay. But, you know, there are things which are obviously open to interpretation. Some people absolutely detest pitch class set things and it doesn't help them at all. I think to learn stuff, I think it is important. But, I mean, I'm not going to sit at a keyboard and go, oh, I'm going to write set 419 and then 48. Who does that? I mean, nobody in their right mind would do that. So, yeah. But this is a lovely little cue. And I like the fact that, you know, it relates to this sort of, you know, that it's very militarist. It's a sort of fourths descending.
Yeah. Why do we associate that with military? Is it because of the valves on the trumpet?
I don't know. It could be. Yeah, it could be that, actually. Possibly, yes, I think so. I mean, fourths, fifths, they're kind of
Right.
the same thing because they're equivalent inversions
Yes.
to each other. So, yeah, I think so. It's a very different vibe, though, at that point, isn't it? Because the scene's changed. But we're still in C sharp. Don't forget that the whole thing... No, it started off in C sharp. We're still there. It's still gone back to it, and then it kind of oscillates. Often he has this ambiguity where you only have two notes. An E and a C sharp. I could have a G sharp in there, or I could even have an A in there. Which one? Or I could even have a G natural. In other words, we don't really know. He's left it deliberately kind of... Yeah, he's left it open. So we've got that going on, and that just repeats really, along with a big pedal on B and then F sharp, and then we're into the wonderful droids, and that finishes the 5 minutes.
5 minutes. You know the part that goes like da 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 da. I can't remember the name because I can't remember where it was. Where someone on Twitter drew a connection between that and Duel of the Fates, which I thought was interesting.
Oh yeah.
I think he was mentioning that compared to
yes, I can sort of see it. I mean,
rhythmically,
it's a bit tenuous.
It is.
I mean, yes, yeah. I think it's a bit tenuous.
For sure. I think it's tenuous, but I always think it's interesting the connections that people just like. Just feel.
Well, I mean, it was like that connection before about Luke. When he falls from the Darth Vader moment later in the film. I mean, that's just I'm sure nobody else has that thing. So I'm not going to invalidate anybody's opinion. You can't. That's not right, Everybody has a different sort of view of things. So yeah, if you draw a connection with it, great, especially if it brings you into more of a sort of passionate understanding of something. I think that's rather nice thing. So, I mean, all in all, those 5 minutes are some of the most extraordinary music of the whole film. That Hoth sequence, people still talk about it today, huge documentaries about it. And obviously there's books about the whole sort of thing as well. But musically, it's fascinating because it's got everything that John Williams tends to do with those action cues. So it's got the octatonic stuff. It's got sort of these 3/3... It's got all the percussive elements. It's got atonalism. It's got Luke Skywalker's theme. I mean, great. I mean, amazing. It's got the rebel fanfare. It's a bit of the Imperial
heroic
March.
descending tetrachords.
The heroic descending tetrachords, exactly. Wonderful.
Which drop off. It's not so heroic as we go on.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely not. And it's relentless. It just keeps building, stops. And this modular idea of sort of blocks of sound which can just be sort of jigsawed in, as you said before. Absolutely right. Yeah, totally. It's really fascinating, and it's been a real pleasure to look at it with you as well.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure to look at.
It's nice to share
your work. Yeah.
Well,
I have like the one-on-one guide through it.
Well, it's really nice to be able to talk about it with somebody else, because often, I'm talking to a blank camera.
I feel you. That's why I have a whole podcast, because I don't want to do it by myself. I want to talk to people about it.
Yeah, it's fun and it's great. And, I've seen some of the other things that you've done with other guests, and it's tremendous fun. I mean, and it's so educational as well. Wonderful. Brilliant work.
Thank you.
Of course.
How many 4/3s are in this set of minutes? I'm just curious. Like Forte wise.
How many 3/3s do you mean?
4/3.
3-note chords? Oh, 4/3. Oh, I don't know actually.
I know I saw a few.
As in sort of that one.
Uh-huh.
Not that many in this.
Okay.
No, surprisingly not that many actually.
Huh. Interesting.
They're mostly at the beginning of the cue in 3M3 in the snow battle.
Yeah.
Yeah, not very many actually. It's interesting. I mean, I was just talking about, and sorry to digress into another franchise briefly, but I was analysing after episode 8 the Sauron and Hallbrand theme. and they're both kind of octatonic, with one note that's changed, and one is a retrograde inversion of the other, which I think is fascinating. I don't think I've quite given the game away there, but it's definitely by design, because you don't subconsciously choose like that and then go,
Right.
You don't subconsciously do that. I mean, there's definitely,
unless you're playing with both hands.
Maybe, yeah. Yes, I mean, you might do. Actually, that was a sort of technique that John Tavener.
I do that
all. The modern John.
Oh, I for sure do that. Especially like if I'm trying to learn something on the left hand and I just like learn on the right hand and like kind of mirror it, like it helps the left hand with its coordination.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely true. But there's something rather nice about the design of that, especially when it's not quite, the same thing, because it can sound a little contrived if you just do a reverse of something, especially rhythmically. It doesn't work. But note-wise, melody-wise, or pitch-wise, it does work, I think, quite often. So yeah, it's been absolutely brilliant to sort of go into this and dissect it all. Great.
Wow. Well, thank you very much for taking me through that, taking everyone through that. This is an extraordinary cue. Many people mentioned just being really stricken by the pianos in particular. And I kind of agree. Like, I think it's not all composers, especially like today, would have the amount of sway to be like, you know what, I'm going to need this ridiculous instrumentation. So let's hire all these players because I have a vision. Yeah. Like it actually, like in my mind, I'm like, oh yeah. So it's, if an orchestra isn't enough, like you augment it with like, synths, you obviously augment it with, your virtual instruments. And that's very common to, have some live and some virtual instruments. And it almost like, I almost forgot that like you could also augment an orchestra with more instruments too. That's an option. That's also a thing people have done. And so
absolutely.
This is old school
totally
way.
It is an old school way. And it's sort of, I wonder whether this will come back. I mean, I don't want to speak ill of John, but he's getting old. Bless him. Yeah. And there will come a point where he's no longer with us, of course. And then there'll be more retrospective on his music, definitely. Because I think, it took me, I mean, as a small child listening to Star Wars and watching it, obviously, on the big screen, I mean, I was completely overwhelmed. And I was always confused as to how he writes it. Where do the notes come from? And now through sort of, bits of analysis and obviously composing myself, knowing that there are octatonic scales, they exist and people use them, and hexatonic sets and things like that. But they use it in the context of everything else. It's not just a separated thing. And what Williams is so amazing at, we haven't even talked about jazz, is that he's such an eclectic musician, isn't he? I mean, he's steeped in the jazz tradition. He's steeped in the classical tradition, and manages to move seamlessly, it seems, between both idioms. So one day he can do Catch Me If You Can, and the next day he can do The Last Jedi.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, what? How? What? Or then he can write a sort of, a piano concerto finale to E.T. What? I mean, who? Yeah. It's just absolutely extraordinary. So he's very good at having been steeped in kind of all traditions and lived at a very exciting time of music changing. It's certainly working practice have changed. I mean, I'm sure in The Last Jedi and the final Star Wars film 9, he would have been probably rather frustrated by different cuts coming to him and reworking cues and doing that, which we're all used to, because if you mocked everything up, it's relatively easier to change rather than go into a studio and go, oh, right, transposing the E-flat alto sax to sort of on the fly, writing it out by hand. Nobody wants to do that.
He did have a year for The Last Jedi, though, which I think is
he did.
Great.
Yeah, definitely. So he's a phenomenal musician, and one that's always inspiring, and Yeah, I mean, this, Empire Strikes Back is such an iconic film. I've seen it so many times, it's ridiculous. And every time I see it, I'm sure you have as well, especially after the round that you'll be doing with the film. You'll never listen to it the same way because you're going to be then very conscious musically of what's going on. But I still think it's amazing how many times I watch it and I then forget that the music's, I know the music's there, but I just get so wrapped up in the drama and the film and everything else. And I saw Return of the Jedi recently live, performed by the LSO, the London Symphony Orchestra at the Royal Albert Hall. And I don't think I've ever heard the orchestra play so well. It was incredible. And when you see it again on the big screen after so many years, and I just think it's beautifully acted as well. I mean, everything about it, I love. That's it. I'm a fan.
I would hope so. Given the work that you do.
Yes, exactly.
Well,
right.
This is a good, transition to the Star Wars Music Minute Questionnaire, which I know you have thought about a little bit or a lot. So, are you ready for it?
I'm ready.
I was going to say awesome and all right at the same time. They just came out at the same time.
Didn't quite.
So are all right. Awesome. All right. Question number 1. In exactly 3 words, what does Star Wars sound like?
So I wrote, and I truly believe this, transporting, transforming, and transcendental.
I like it. That's so good.
Because it transports me somewhere to a different world. I can not have to think about politics, religion, Twitter, anything. I'm transported to a different world in a galaxy far away. It transforms me because whenever I watch any Star Wars film, really, I just feel renewed. And it's comforting as well. And transcendental, there's a really deep, and it doesn't often get talked about because can get a little bit strange to talk about religion, and it's not religious, but there's a spiritual aspect to it in the Force, which I kind of use. I mean, I'm not going to go as far as being a Jedi as a religion, but I kind of believe in it.
I actively think about the Force so much. It's like, it's a lot.
Yeah. I mean, especially when, and this is a strange thing, but I love trekking and hill walking and things like that. And when you get really tired, I just imagine Luke and Dagobah sort of using it to sort of go through the forests of Dagobah and kind of just getting through it and just always getting to the end and not giving up. And that's, that sort of Jedi or Force user way is a sort of rather nice thing to aspire to. I think it was one of my old tutors said that film was the modern mythology of our generation, in the sense that Greek mythology, the looking up to those sort of ideals of Perseus and the Odyssey and Homer and all of these sort of gods and things, that for them was their sort of myth stuff, and for us it's film often.
Totally.
And I think certainly the 70s and 80s, because there was very much a sort of new age movement, wasn't there, and a revival of I don't know, Tibetan Buddhism, for example, and all sorts of spiritual new age things. And it seemed to definitely strike a chord with, a post-war America and, everywhere, Europe particularly, which resonated with so many people. And I think going back to what my teacher said, who's the greatest, the reason he said John Williams is the greatest 20th century composer is he said, how many composers can get 4 billion people to remember their music? And you could go into a township in Soweto and somebody would know the Star Wars theme. I mean, that is incredible. I mean, absolutely incredible. And the story of Luke Skywalker and the legend that it is. And I just think, Lucas often gets sort of derided by, fans or so-called fans sometimes. And actually, he created an extraordinary mythology, which we're still talking about and still get enthused by. And so that's why I chose those 3 words, because I think they kind of reveal the heart of Star Wars. And I think that's something that, somebody like Dave Filoni, for example, who I adore, I think he gets it. He understands. That last season of Rebels was one of the most amazing of things of any content I've ever seen. It was just extraordinary. And if other people haven't seen it, I urge you to go and watch it.
Yeah, Rebels is really good.
And Kevin Kiner's music for it is superb as well. Anyway, second question.
Second question. What is something related to Star Wars music or sound that you want to learn more about?
I had originally wanted to say, I'd quite like to look at all his early sketches for A New Hope, but then thought, because kind of that's an obvious thing to do, but then actually I don't think that. I'd like to go and talk to him about what he was taught as a young composer, because I don't think he's ever given an interview about that ever. And that is something which is very personal, because it's you can't sit on somebody's therapy session, can you? You know, it's not something that you really talk about. But my relationship with my old teacher, Joe Horowitz, was a really lovely, positive one. And it was completely transformative. You know, I'd never really had proper lessons before working with him for maybe 4 or 5 years as a postgraduate and at the time a doctoral student. And, you know, some of the things he said I didn't always agree with, but at least they were thought-provoking and got me thinking. And I would love to go back to Williams and just go, tell me about Tedeschi. How did things work? You know, what did you do? What did you discuss? Do you know about the octatonics? I mean, you know, I just wanted to quiz him about it. And I don't know to what extent it impressioned him, because I think a lot of his training was sort of on the job. You know, he didn't really have time to do that in terms of study. I think he was just like constantly in the studio, constantly writing. Oh, hello, Mr. Trombonist, can you play this? Is that okay? No, that's too high for a bass trombone. Just keep it on the stave. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. There's your orchestration
information.
lesson.
There's your orchestration lesson, you know. So I think I would like to, I don't know if it's possible, but
I'm rooting for you.
His younger stuff.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Yeah, I think a composer should interview him about that. You know, not from like a press angle or like something like that.
Not for any article either. I think just, I mean, it could be in a sort of the New Yorker or something, but yeah.
Or it could just be like,
I don't know who would do
for
it.
oral history purposes.
Yeah. Why not? Absolutely.
Yeah.
It'd be fascinating.
Yeah. Wow. Well, question number 3 is, what is a score or soundtrack that you're fond of besides anything Star Wars?
Lord of the Rings, Howard Shore, every time. And specifically, the lighting of the beacons of Gondor. I mean, that is just one of those bits in the film where you just go, it's incredibly cinematic, because I have no idea how they shot it. Because even if it was CGI, they've made it look so real. It's just so extraordinary. And that's the point where hope is rekindled, literally kindled. And the music that goes with it just ramps up. It's not, and the sort of Rohan theme comes back in. It's just it's such a rousing thing. And I think he was very clever, Shaw, in cutting out a lot of complexity in the score. So it's quite sort of simple in terms of chords and things like that. Quite simple in terms of orchestral blend. He tends to go for a blended sound, so violas with clarinets, with horns, not separated like Williams is, where you get the harmony in the trombones, but the melody in the flutes, you know. And he wrote enormous amounts of music for those 3 films. I mean, you know, Doug Adams's book on it, which details every leitmotif and every sort of available idea that he came to. I think it's a remarkable piece of work, actually. Is extraordinary, because it's as in depth as Tolkien. Well, maybe not quite as in depth as Tolkien was with his world, but it's just something that I can keep listening to and never grow bored of it. And I thought about your question, because I think it has to be something that you keep listening to, that you don't ever tire of. And that for me was a really interesting score. And actually Rings of Power, I think recently, I mean, it's going to take a bit of time to dissect all of it and go through it. But I think Bear McCreary has done an incredible job, really bringing that world to maybe a different audience or a different generation of audience, let's say, in a remarkable way. And I think equally some of those themes are extremely memorable. I mean, that last, the Ring song at the end of that last episode. I don't know whether you've seen it, so I don't want to give the game away.
I have not watched any Lord of the Rings. Well, I've only I've maybe seen a couple movies, and I randomly saw The Hobbit with my dad, who thought this movie was about a dragon. So, but Lord of the Rings is on my list. I have a very short list. There are some franchises I don't care about at all. Yeah. Don't have time. I just don't have time to do all of them, Yeah. But Lord of the Rings is one of the ones that I do want to, properly
explore,
get into at some point. So I'm like, this will all make sense to me one day. Keep talking.
Yeah. And the other one that I mean, if I'm allowed another one, interesting enough would be from the realm of TV. And it would be Murray Gold's work with the new Doctor Who. Oh. When I say the new Who, I mean 2005. It goes back to, and then, I just thought as a composer, he got better and better as he worked. But he is a brilliant theme writer, and somebody who just evokes real emotion, and that's what you want to do as a composer. You want to affect people emotionally. It's interesting. I was listening to an interview with Bear McCreary, and he said that his mentor was Elmer Bernstein. I mean, okay. And he said to him, how do you know what to write? And he went, I write whatever I think the audience need to hear. And that's a really important thing. And that's exactly what my own teacher said. And that's, I think, what Murray Gold's good at, and what all good composers are. They want to write something that the audience want to hear. Zimmer's very good at it as well.
Wants or needs to hear.
Yeah. And the other one, there are two other things. The Orville, I think, is astonishing music. So Bruce Broughton, who did the main theme. You got Joel McNeely working on it, who did, the original. All sorts of different things.
Didn't you do Fantastic?
Yeah, I think so. And then Andrew Cottee as well, who's phenomenal. And then the other person I think should work for Star Wars is Christopher Willis. I think that's his name. So he did Death of Stalin. If I've got it wrong, we'll correct it and put it in the YouTube description.
That's kind of a relatively new movie, right?
Yes.
But on Netflix or something.
So if you look up on,
I think I liked it.
If you look up Mickey Mouse 2013 on YouTube and just go through the score, it is unbelievable. I mean, it's as if Scott Bradley wrote it. It's unbelievably good. I mean, just that his ear is genius. And again, anybody who can combine jazz with classical, because I'm not a jazzer. I wish I was. I'd love to be able to write jazz properly. But those people are really exciting composers. So those are the people I'd be sort of looking out for and seeing what their work is like in 10 years' time at the moment, for me.
Well, thanks for the tip. If anyone wants to make any bets, there you go.
See what happens.
Yeah. So the final rundown is the sound. Gosh, I have so many notes. I have to scroll up. Okay. So the cues from the set of minutes were 3M, bits from 3M2, Leia's instructions, 3M3, the snow battle, and the beginning of 3M4, Luke's first crash. And then in the soundtrack, this is the Battle of Hoth, which is a very long name, Ion Cannon / Imperial Walkers / Beneath the, and then it cuts off like on everywhere I see online. So I guess they ran out of characters. And then we hear beneath. Yeah, and then we hear the Rebel Fanfare, Descending Heroic Tetrachords, the main theme, and Droids. Woo! Lots of stuff. Dominic, where can people find you online and find your amazing work?
Well, just my website, dominicsewell.co.uk, or my YouTube channel, which is Dominic Sewell Music.
Yes, and you've already gone through all of The Phantom Menace.
Indeed.
Correct?
And I start Empire Strikes Back soon.
good thing to pair with this
Start.
show.
I know.
Yes. So, listeners, I think you will like. I think you will definitely like if you're not already familiar with Dom's YouTube channel. And I should say, as a new patron, he posts like his reductions and like even like Sibelius files or XML files, which is how I was able to like extract the violin parts. I was like, just the
brilliant.
Yeah. So tremendous resources. I would love to have you back on the show, future season, and yeah, it's been great to talk with you. My words have kind of run out, but like
it's fine.
It's been awesome.
It's been quite a long time since we've been talking.
Long time.
It's been fantastic to talk to you and share all of that, and your work is superb as well. So it's been a real privilege to be on your show, Xanthi. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, I'm so flattered. I don't take compliments very well, but thank you. That means so much to me. Yeah. And listeners, thank you for sticking with this show. It really helps me. I always find that like listeners help ground discussion sometimes when I'm reminded of questions and things. And you help decide the course of like the little explanations that happen. So a lot of the things that we explained today have been because I've gotten listener feedback being like, hey, I wish you did an example when you mentioned this. So all of that stuff really helps. And yeah, on that note, you can find Star Wars Music Minute on all the online places. And we'll be back next week to talk about minutes 31 through 35. May the Force be with you, and see you next week on Star Wars Music Minute.